Welcome back to Omni Wizard, where the legends never end. Today's story: what if Harry Potter awakened Superman's powers and Wonder Woman, Supergirl, and Power Girl claimed him? Before we dive in, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a single adventure never slips past you. Settle in and let's begin. Chapter 1. The sky remembers his name. The thing in the sealed vault had no name, and that was the first lie Harry Potter caught it telling. He stood at the threshold of Containment 9, 2 floors below the lowest map of the Ministry of Magic, where the air tasted of old stone and colder iron, and he read the brass plate riveted to the door for the third time. Unclassified stellar artifact. Do not approach without warrant. The Unspeakables had a gift for making the extraordinary sound like a parking violation. 3 of their researchers had walked through that door in the last month. None had walked back out. The ministry had quietly recorded them as transferred to foreign postings, which was the kind of bookkeeping that made Harry's skin itch. "You don't have to do this," said Hermione from the corridor behind him. She had her wand drawn but pointed at the floor, the posture of someone who knew that drawing a weapon and using it were 2 different decisions. Robards signed off on observation. Observation. That word does a lot of work, Harry, and none of the work involves you opening the door. 3 people went in, Harry said. He kept his voice level because the level voice was the one Hermione trusted, and because the alternative voice, the one that wanted to put his fist through the brass plate and the door behind it, was not a voice anyone needed to hear in a sublevel full of dangerous artifacts. 3 people went in, and the ministry decided the cheapest way to handle it was to lose the paperwork. If I'd had a galleon for every time someone official decided I was a paperwork problem, I'd have bought Gringotts by now. That isn't an argument. That's a grievance wearing an argument's coat. He almost laughed, 8 years out of school and she could still dismantle him with a clause. Fine, real reason, there's a girl on the missing list. Junior researcher 23, first posting. Her mum has written the Auror office every day for 9 days. I read the letters, somebody should read the letters. He set his palm flat against the door, and the metal was warmer than metal in a cellar had any business being, warm the way a chest is warm, the way something with a pulse is warm, and nobody else is going to open this. So, Hermione was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the lecture had gone out of her and something steadier had come in. 60 seconds, you look, you describe what you see, and you come back out and we plan. Promise me 60 seconds. 60 seconds, Harry agreed and meant it, which was its own small tragedy because the artifact had been waiting a very long time and 60 seconds was not what it had in mind. The door did not so much open as decide to stop being a door. He felt the wards peel back under his hand, layer after layer, unspeakable work, beautiful and paranoid, the magical equivalent of a bank vault wrapped in a riddle wrapped in a threat. They should have held against him. They had held against curse breakers of the highest order for a decade. Instead, they came apart at his touch like wet paper, and Harry had half a second to register how wrong that was before the light reached him. It was not light the way a lumos is light, or a sunrise, or a patronus. Those things illuminate. This thing arrived. It came up out of the floor of the vault in a single column, white going to gold going to a white so total it had no color left, and inside the column hung the artifact itself. A shard of crystal the length of his forearm, faceted in a geometry that made his eyes ache, turning slowly on nothing. Etched along its length were characters he had never seen, angular and interlocking. An alphabet that looked less invented than discovered, as if someone had found writing already present in the structure of matter and simply traced over it. The 3 missing researchers were there too. They stood in a loose ring around the shard, perfectly still, their faces tipped up into the light with expressions of such uncomplicated peace that for one terrible second Harry thought they were corpses arranged as decoration. Then the nearest one blinked, slow as a lizard, and Harry understood that they were not dead. They were elsewhere. The light had reached into them and switched off everything that wasn't worship. Right, Harry said to no one because saying things out loud had kept him sane through worse rooms than this. That's the cult of the magic rock. Lovely. Hermione, I'm going to lie to you about the 60 seconds. He should have backed out. He knew, with the clean tactical clarity that the war had burned into him at 17, that the correct move was to retreat, seal the door, and come back with a curse breaker and a pensive and an exit strategy. He knew it the way you know the stove is hot. And then the shard turned another few degrees on its axis, and one of the etched characters caught the column of light and threw it directly into Harry's eyes, and the knowledge stopped mattering because the light had found him too. It did not switch him off. That was the difference. He would spend a long time afterward trying to explain the difference to Hermione, to himself, to a woman with a sword who would ask him in a voice, like a verdict, what it had felt like to be chosen by a dying star. The researchers had been emptied. Harry was filled. The light went into him through the eyes and the warm skin of his palm and the old curse scar on his forehead, and it did not stop at the surface. It went down. It went into the place where his magic lived, the deep reservoir he had learned to find in 4th year and had never once seen the bottom of, and Harry felt the light reach that reservoir and recognize it. That was the only word, recognition. As if two things built for the same purpose had finally, across an impossible distance, found each other. His magic answered. He had been stunned before. He had been hit by a killing curse twice and lived through both, which was not an experience he recommended. This was the opposite of all of it. There was no impact and no darkness. Instead, every cell in his body was abruptly, simultaneously informed that it had been running at a fraction of its capacity for his entire life, and that the fraction was over. Power came up his spine in a column that matched the column of light shard for shard, magic and starfire braiding together, and Harry heard a sound he later realized was the stone floor of the vault cracking outward from beneath his feet in a 6-foot ring, and he heard, very distantly, Hermione screaming his name from the corridor, and he could not answer her because his lungs were full of the sun. When it ended, the shard was dark. It hung in the air a moment longer, inert now, a beautiful dead thing, and then it dropped and shattered on the broken floor into 1,000 pieces of ordinary crystal that held no light at all. The column was gone. The 3 researchers crumpled where they stood, asleep or unconscious, breathing alive. And Harry Potter stood in the center of the cracked ring with his arms slightly out from his sides and discovered that he was not touching the floor. He looked down. Between the soles of his boots and the rubble was a gap of perhaps 3 inches, and nothing held him up, and he did not fall. "Okay," he said. His voice came out steady, which astonished him, because every other system he owned was reporting in at once, and none of them agreed on what had happened. He could hear his own blood. He could hear Hermione's 4 meters away through stone, a quick frightened drumbeat. He could hear a beetle somewhere in the wall, and water moving through a pipe 2 floors up, and the entire atrium far above going about its evening business. 1,000 conversations layered into a single roar he could nonetheless pull apart thread by thread if he chose. The world had become loud in a way that should have driven him to his knees, and instead he found, testing it, that he could turn it down, that the volume was his now. "Okay, that's okay. Harry," the door, Hermione shoving against wards that had resealed behind him, her wand throwing sparks against a barrier that should not have been there. He turned toward her voice, and turning, he drifted, his whole body pivoting in the air with no more effort than a thought, and the casual impossibility of it was what finally cracked his composure. Not fear, wonder. He was 23 years old, and he had spent every one of those years being told what he was: the chosen one, the boy who lived, the savior, the symbol, the convenient surface other people wrote their hopes across, and not one of those titles had ever felt like this. This felt like a door opening that he had not known was a door. This felt like the first true thing. He reached out with his hand, and the wards on Containment 9 came apart again at his will, and Hermione half fell into the room, caught herself, and froze. She took in the cracked floor, the sleeping researchers, the dead crystal, and Harry hanging 3 inches above the rubble with light still moving under his skin like a banked fire. She was the cleverest person he had ever known, and he watched her run the entire situation in under 2 seconds and arrive, visibly, at a conclusion she did not want. "Get down from there," she said. "I don't think I know how," Harry admitted, and then, because it was Hermione and lying to her had never once worked, "and I don't think I want to." She crossed to him anyway, picking through the rubble, and reached up and took his hand, and the moment her fingers closed on his, he came down, gently, his boots settling onto the broken stone in the manner of an episode now quietly resolved. Her hand was shaking. His was not. He noticed that, and noticed how strange it was, that the war hero famous for his nerves should be the calm one in the room, and the woman who had faced down everything he had faced down should be the one trembling. And he understood that the difference was that she had just watched the laws of the world bend around her oldest friend, and he had been on the inside of the bending where it felt like coming home. "Your eyes," she whispered. "What about them?" "They were green." She got the rest out with effort. "When the light hit you, they went gold. They're going back." "But Harry, for a second they were the same color as that." She pointed at the dead crystal without looking at it. He had no answer for that. He had no answer for any of it, so he did the thing he always did when the world stopped making sense, which was to find the next small task and hold on to it. "The researchers," he said. "We get them out. We get them to St. Mungo's, and we get Robards down here. And you and I are going to have a very honest conversation about what the Department of Mysteries was keeping in a cellar with a parking violation sign on the door." He crouched by the nearest sleeper. the girl from the missing list, 23, first posting her mother's 9 letters, and he lifted her as easily as lifting a coat, and the ease of it, the total absence of strain in his arms, was its own quiet alarm. And then, he said, I think I'm going to need to learn what I am now, because I don't think the answer's in any book we own. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and whatever she saw made her decide not to argue. No, she agreed softly, I don't think it is. That night Harry Potter carried 3 sleeping people up out of the dark, 2 floors and then 10. And when he stepped out into the atrium with the girl in his arms and the night sky visible through the enchanted ceiling, he stopped and looked up and felt the stars looking back, and for the span of one breath the loneliness that had lived in his chest since the war ended simply lifted, the way fog lifts, and he thought, with no idea how right he was, something out there knows my name now. St. Mungo's took the 3 researchers without questions, which was its own kind of answer because St. Mungo's always had questions. Harry watched a healer pass a wand over the girl from the missing list, and watched the healer's face do the thing professional faces do when they encounter something they have no protocol for, and he understood that the cover-up went higher than Robards, higher than the Department of Mysteries, all the way up to whatever office had decided that 3 vanished citizens were cheaper to forget than to explain. Gawain Robards arrived at 2 in the morning in a dressing gown under a hastily transfigured cloak, and found Harry sitting in the corridor with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them, the posture of a man waiting out a long night. The head Auror sat down beside him without being asked, which Harry respected, and for a while neither of them spoke. I'm going to tell you something, Robards said at last, and then I'm going to ask you to be reasonable, and I already know you won't be, so let's both save time. He rubbed his eyes. That artifact came down out of the sky over the Hebrides 40 years ago, before my time. Before any current interest, though there was interest. The Unspeakables called it the Visitor, and they spent 4 decades failing to make it do anything but glow. Then last month it started waking up, and people started walking into that vault who hadn't been told to, and we couldn't keep them out, and we couldn't get them back, and the official position became that the cheapest patch was a locked door and a boring sign. He looked at Harry sidelong. You weren't supposed to be able to open that door either. I noticed, what did it do to you? And here was the choice. Harry had spent his whole life learning when to lie to the Ministry, and he had got very good at it, and he discovered that he no longer wanted to be good at it. He held out his hand, palm up, and let a thread of fire leap from his eyes and hover an inch above his skin, a controlled and impossible flame burning nothing, and he watched Robards go very still. It woke something up, Harry said quietly, and closed his hand, and the flame was gone. Or it gave me something. I haven't worked out which yet. I can fly, Gawain. I can hear your heart from across a room, and I can see the bone under your skin if I'm not careful, and I caught a hawk's talons on my arm yesterday, and the hawk came off worse. My magic still works. It works more than it used to. The 2 things have grown together, and I can't tell them apart anymore. He turned his head and met the older man's eyes. I'm not telling you so you can study me. I'm telling you because 3 people went into that room, and the Ministry decided to lose the paperwork, and I am done with paperwork. Whatever this is, I'm going to use it to do the thing the Ministry keeps deciding is too expensive. I'm going to read the letters. And I'd rather have you with me than in my way. Robards was quiet for a long moment. He was a practical man, and Harry watched him weigh the practical realities, the way you weigh a stone in your hand before deciding whether to throw it. You understand, he said finally, that the moment the public learns there's a wizard who can do what you're describing, every government on Earth's going to want to own you, study you, or end you. Usually in that order. Then they'll be disappointed, Harry said. I've been a prize before, I didn't care for it. Hermione found them there at dawn, having spent the night with the artifact fragments and the vault records, and a face that told Harry she had not slept and had not intended to. She sat down on Harry's other side and put a thick folder of parchment on her knees and did not open it. I ran every diagnostic I know, she said, and then I invented 4 more and ran those. Do you want the honest version or the gentle one? When have I ever wanted the gentle one? The honest one is that I don't understand what you are now, and neither does the artifact, because the artifact is dead and it took its secrets with it. She turned to look at him, and her exhaustion was real, and so was the thing underneath it, the loyalty that had survived a war in a forest and 8 years of him being difficult to love. But I understand you, Harry, and I know exactly what you're going to do with this, because it's the same thing you've always done. You're going to find the people nobody's coming for, and you're going to come for them. She stopped, started again. I just want you to remember that you have people who came for you too. That you're not the only one allowed to be the one who shows up. Harry looked at her and at Robards on his other side, and at the corridor full of sleeping researchers who would wake up because he had chosen to open a door, and the loneliness that had lived in his chest since the war ended did its second strange thing of the night, which was to feel, for a moment, like it might be a thing he could survive. I'll remember, he said, and almost meant it. Before he left the hospital that morning, he went to find the girl from the missing list. She was awake by then, propped against a bank of pillows in a quiet ward, pale and thinned by 9 days of standing motionless in a column of alien light, and her mother was asleep in the chair beside her with one hand still wrapped around her daughter's wrist, the grip of a woman who had written 9 letters into a silence and had stopped, somewhere around the 6th, expecting any of them to be answered. Harry stood in the doorway and did not go in. He had not come to be thanked. He had come because he wanted to see with his own eyes and not through a healer's careful summary that the opening of the door had been worth what it had cost, that a person who had been a name on a list was now a person again, breathing in a bed with her mother's hand around her wrist. The girl saw him in the doorway and seemed to know who he was, the way everyone always knew, and for a moment Harry braced for the familiar thing, the widening eyes, the reverence, the weight of being a story other people told themselves. It did not come. The girl only looked at him with the flat, exhausted clarity of someone who had been somewhere terrible and had not yet decided how to carry it. "It was singing," she said. Her voice was a rasp. "The light the whole time. It wanted us to stay and listen, and it was so easy to stay, and I couldn't remember my own name, and then it stopped, and I could." Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "Did you stop it?" "It stopped itself," Harry said, "but I was there when it did. My mum wrote letters." She said it like a person, only now understanding the fact of it, the proof of being wanted made physical and counted. 9 of them. "She told me nobody read them." "I read them," Harry said. The girl looked at him for a long moment and her eyes filled, and she did not thank him, and he was glad, because thanks would have made it about him, and it had never once been about him. It had been about the letters. He inclined his head to her, the small courtesy he gave to people who had survived things, and he left her with her mother's hand around her wrist and walked out into the dawn, and the loneliness in his chest, which had eased for one breath in the atrium and then closed back over him like water, eased again, a little longer this time. He had read the letters. Someone should read the letters. He had built his whole battered life on that single stubborn principle, and he carried it now into a body that could level mountains, and he understood, walking out into the cold morning, that the power had not changed the principle at all. The power had only made the principle harder to ignore. He did not remember the promise for long. That was the trouble with promises made at dawn to people who loved you. Daylight burned them off. By the 2nd day on the moor he had stopped owling Hermione back, and by the 4th he had stopped going home at all, sleeping rough on the heather in a body that no longer seemed to need much sleep, learning the shape of what he had become in the only way he had ever learned anything that mattered, which was alone and by trial and by the kind of error that left scorch marks. The flying came first and came easiest. The rest he had to wrestle. The heat from his eyes nearly cost him a thumb before he learned its trigger, which was not anger, as he had assumed, but intention, the simple, clear decision that a thing should burn. Once he understood that the power obeyed his will and not his temper, he stopped being afraid of it, and once he stopped being afraid of it, it became precise. By the end of the 1st week, he could carve his initials into granite from across a valley or warm a kettle without cracking the enamel, the same faculty turned up or down like a flame under glass. The frost breath he learned by the opposite method, by letting go rather than reaching, exhaling the cold out of himself in a controlled plume that he taught himself to shape, until he could lay a sheet of ice across a pond in the pattern of a snowflake, or stop a charging ram in its tracks behind a wall of frost without harming a hair on it. What fascinated him, what he turned over in his mind in the long bright hours over the moor, was the way the new power and the old magic had braided together. He tried an experiment on the 6th day that made him laugh out loud at his own audacity. He cast a disillusionment charm on himself, the spell that bent light around a wizard and made him hard to see, and then he flew, and discovered that the charm held at speed, that he could move faster than the human eye and the human spell at once. A wizard's invisibility carried on a star's velocity. He layered a cushioning charm into his own grip and lifted a boulder the size of a cottage without crushing the moss on its underside. He found that his patroness, when he cast it now, came out blinding, a stag of white fire that lit the whole moor like a second noon, and that he had to dismiss quickly before it set the heather alight. The two halves of him were not at war. They were collaborators. Everything his magic could shape, his new strength could carry, and everything his new strength could not finesse, his magic could. He pushed the experiments further than was sensible, because there was no one out here to tell him to be sensible, and that absence was its own intoxication. He flew straight up one afternoon until the sky went from blue to violet to black, and the curve of the earth showed below him and the air gave out entirely. And he found that he did not need it, that some furnace at the center of him ran on light and not on breath, and he hung there at the edge of space with the whole planet turning beneath his boots and understood, with a calm that frightened him a little, that there was no obvious ceiling to this. He dove back down through the burning friction of re-entry and felt it as warmth, no more, and put himself out over the sea and discovered he could outrun his own sound. He cast spells at the bottom of the ocean to see whether magic worked through that much water and pressure, and it did. Each test answered one question and opened three, and Harry, who had spent his life being handed problems too large to solve and solving them anyway, found in the open-ended hugeness of his own new nature a kind of joy he had not let himself feel since before the war. He understood somewhere in that week of solitude, becoming something the world had never seen. Not a wizard with a few extra tricks, not one of whatever flew in the wrong sky he had not yet found. Something at the seam of both, and the loneliness of it should have frightened him, and instead, in the clean cold air over the empty moor, it felt almost like freedom. He had spent his life being told what he was. Out here there was no one to tell him, and so the question was genuinely his to answer for once, which was perhaps why he flew toward the drowning voices over London without a second thought. He had been alone with his own power for a week, and a week was long enough to remember why he had wanted it. The world did not let him keep the secret long. Secrets the size of the one Harry was carrying have a way of finding the daylight. It happened over the Thames, in front of perhaps 400 muggles and at least one journalist, and afterward Hermione would point out with the grim patience of someone who had predicted exactly this that there had been 6 better ways to handle it, and Harry would agree, and would not for one second regret how he had chosen. He had not meant to be over London at all. He had been flying home, high and fast, when he heard it. A sound that did not belong, a grinding shriek of stressed metal, and then the long communal note of human voices all rising in fear at once, a sound he knew from the war and had hoped never to hear again. He was 9 miles up. He found the source before the sound had finished, his vision dropping through cloud and haze to a tour boat on the Thames, packed rail to rail, listing hard to starboard with smoke pouring from its engine housing and the river coming up over the low side. 100 people more and the nearest pier 400 meters off, and the cold brown water already at the deck. There was a version of Harry Potter who would have thought about the statute of secrecy. That version had died somewhere over the moor, in the cold high air, watching a hawk's talons break against his skin. The Harry who dropped out of the cloud over the Thames did not think about the statute, or the journalist, or the 400 phones already turning toward the falling sky. He thought about the water at the deck and the math of how fast it was rising and the children he could already hear crying among the voices, and he went down through the air faster than the sound could follow, and he caught the boat. He caught it the way you catch a child stepping off a curb with both hands and no drama, his palms flat against the steel hull below the waterline, and he simply decided that it would not sink. The boat's full weight, waterlogged and loaded, came onto his arms, and his arms did not feel it. He rose, and the boat rose with him, water sheeting off the deck in silver curtains, the listing hull leveling as he leveled it, and 100 people who had been about to drown found themselves instead lifting clear of the river on the upturned palms of a young man in a battered coat who was, very obviously, flying. He set them down on the embankment as gently as he could, which with practice would become genuinely gentle, and on that first day was merely survivable. The keel grinding onto the stone walkway and the passengers tumbling out over the rail into the arms of strangers and bystanders, and, soon enough, ambulance crews. Harry stood among them on the embankment, the river at his back, 100 people staring at him and 400 more pressing in from the streets, every phone in London turning his way, and he understood that the secret was over. Not the wizarding statute, though that too. The other secret. The one where Harry Potter got to be a private person with an impossible gift. That one had just gone over the rail and into the Thames and was not coming back. A child, 6 perhaps, soaked to the bone and shivering, detached from her frantic mother and walked straight up to him, the way only the very young will walk up to the impossible, and looked up at him with enormous serious eyes. "Are you an angel?" she asked. And Harry, who had been the chosen one and the boy who lived and the symbol and the surface, crouched down so that his eyes were level with hers and felt something settle in him that had been loose his whole life. "No," he told her, and he was smiling, and he meant every word. "I'm just a bloke who was in the right place. Are you all right?" "Where's your mum?" The girl pointed. Harry guided her back to her mother and stood, and the crowd's noise broke over him like surf, the questions and the phones and the first shouted name. Someone who had recognized him from a decade of profit front pages. Harry Potter, it's Harry Potter. And he knew that within the hour the entire wizarding world and a good fraction of the Muggle one would know what he had done and what he was, and he found that he did not mind. He was tired of being a surface. He had done a thing that was unambiguously, simply good with his own 2 hands, and no prophecy had required it of him, and no dark lord had shaped it, and no one had told him he had to. He had simply heard people drowning and chosen to fly. He rose off the embankment, slow and deliberate, so that they could all see it was a choice and not a trick, and he climbed into the evening sky over London with the whole city watching, and somewhere below him a journalist was already writing the word that would chase him for the rest of his life. the headline that would run in the morning above a photograph of a young man holding a boat on his hands, a new sun. That should have been the end of the strangeness, or at least a plateau. It was not. The world Harry had saved a boat full of people in was not, he was about to learn, entirely the world he had been born in. He felt it that same night, flying north over the dark spine of England toward the safe house where Hermione was waiting with what he expected to be a truly historic lecture. He felt it as a wrongness in the sky, a place where the stars were not the stars he knew, a faint doubling at the edge of his new vision as if he were looking at the heavens through a slightly cracked lens. He climbed toward it, curious, unafraid in a way he was still getting used to, and the higher he went the worse the doubling became, until he passed through a layer of air that resisted him like cold honey and came out the other side into a night that was subtly, comprehensively wrong. The constellations had shifted. Not by the small amount a season's travel would explain, but wholesale, a different sky pasted over the one he knew. And below him, where the lights of northern cities should have spread in their familiar sprawl, there were lights he did not recognize in shapes he did not recognize, and threaded among them, here and there across the dark curve of the world, were other lights that moved. Lights that flew. Some of them flew faster than anything Harry had a word for, streaking between cities in seconds. Some hung stationary in the high air as he did, and one of them, far off over what should have been the Atlantic, was so bright and so vast and so wrong that looking at it directly made the old scar on his forehead ache, a thing that had not happened in years. The shard had not only changed him, it had moved him. Or it had opened a door and he's learning to fly had blundered through it without noticing, the boundary between his world and this one thinner up here in the high cold dark than anywhere on the ground. He hung in the wrong sky and understood, with the clean tactical clarity the war had given him, that he was very far from home in a world with its own flying things and its own terrible bright vastness over the sea, and that the recognition the shard had spoken of, the sense since that night in the vault that something out there knew his name, had not been a comfort at all. It had been a homing signal. This was the world the beacon had been calling him toward. Far below and far off, the bright vast wrongness over the Atlantic shifted, and Harry had the unmistakable sensation, sharp as a hand on the back of the neck, of being noticed. It was not the Atlantic that noticed him, though the thing that hung over the water was a herald of what did. Beyond the thin shell of that world's sky, past the orbit of its moon, past the places where its astronomers had charted nothing but vacuum, there was a planet that was not so much a planet as a wound. It hung in a sky the color of a banked forge, ringed by fire pits that had burned without pause for longer than the human species had owned language, and on a throne of fused black stone at its heart sat a being whose patience was the patience of geology. He did not move. He rarely moved. Movement was for those who could be hurried, and nothing in creation had ever successfully hurried Darkseid. He had felt the beacon answered, that was all. Somewhere across the membrane that separated one continuum from its neighbor, a Kryptonian summoning stone, one of 10,000 such stones the dead empire had scattered across the multiverse to call its lost children home, had finally found a child to call, and had spent itself in the calling, and a new power had been born into the lattice of the worlds. Darkseid did not know the child's name, he did not yet care to. He cared only about the shape of the thing, the raw thermodynamic fact of it, a being that drank suns and bent the local rules and might, if left to grow, become an obstacle. Darkseid collected obstacles the way other beings collected grievances. He set each one in the cold archive behind his eyes, and against each one he raised, eventually, a plan. Find it, he said to the kneeling shape at the foot of the throne, and the word fell into the red air like a stone into a well, and the kneeling shape, who had names in 100 dead tongues and answered most readily to Desaad, bowed lower and went to obey. And in the lowest of the fire pits, where Apocalypse kept the broken things it had not yet decided how to use, a fragment of something that was not Apocalyptian at all stirred for the first time since it had been swept through the membrane in the beacon's wake. It was a scrap of soul. It had no body and very little memory and almost no power, and what it had instead was hunger, the pure undiluted hunger of a thing that had organized its entire existence around the refusal to die. It had ridden the same current that carried Harry Potter across the gap between worlds, a tatter torn loose from a man who had been unmade years ago and had left, against all reckoning, one final splinter of himself snagged in the deep architecture of a vault beneath the Ministry of Magic. The splinter had no name it could speak, but it remembered the way a burn remembers fire, the shape of the one who had unmade it, the green eyes, the broken scar, the one who would not stay killed. In the fire pits of Apocalypse, the splinter of Lord Voldemort tasted the local power, the rich and terrible energy of a world built on cruelty, and began, very slowly, the only work it had ever truly known, the work of putting itself back together. It would be small for a long while, It would be patient because it had learned patience in the worst school there was. And it would listen in the dark beneath the throne for a name it hated more than it had ever hated anything, and it would wait for that name to be spoken aloud. It did not have to wait long. He did not run. He had spent 17 years running from the thing that wanted to kill him, and he had decided somewhere over the moor that he was finished doing that. Instead, he hung in the alien sky and let himself be looked at, and he turned his own new vision out across the curve of this unfamiliar world, taking its measure as it took his, and he said aloud to the stars that were not his stars in a voice that did not shake, "All right, so I'm not in Surrey anymore." A breath of cold air left his lips as frost and fell sparkling toward the distant ground. Let's find out where the door went. And he flew down toward the strange lights, toward the cities with the wrong names, toward a world that had heroes in it already and did not yet know it had room for one more, and as he descended the loneliness in his chest did the strangest thing. It did not deepen the way being lost in an alien world should have deepened it. It eased, because somewhere down there in this place that knew his name before he had arrived were people who could do what he could do. For the whole of his life, Harry Potter had been the only one of his kind in every room. He was about to stop being alone in a way he did not yet have the words for, and the not knowing of it, the open question of it, was the first thing in a long time that felt less like a burden and more like a sunrise. He dropped through the last of the cloud, and the wrong name city came up to meet him, golden and enormous and awake, and on a rooftop near its heart a young woman with hair like cut wheat and a blue suit and a crest on her chest that was not quite the crest Harry would come to know turned her face up toward the falling light, and frowned, and listened to a heartbeat coming down out of the sky that did not match any heartbeat she had ever catalogued. And she rose off the rooftop to meet him with her fists loose at her sides and her chin lifted, ready for a fight and hoping, in a corner of herself she did not examine, that it would be something better than a fight instead. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2 Metropolis doesn't look up. The young woman who came up off the rooftop to meet him did not waste time on hello. "Stop where you are," she called, and her voice carried the way a voice carries when its owner has never once in her life had to shout to be heard. She hung in the air 20 feet below Harry and 10 feet out, fists loose, knees soft, the posture of someone who had been taught to fight by someone very good and had then improved on the lessons. The crest on her chest caught the city light, a stylized diamond holding a letter that was almost an S and was not quite, and Harry, who had spent a week learning that he could read the veins in a leaf from a mile up, read the tension in her shoulders and understood that she expected this to go badly and intended to win anyway. "You came through the barrier. Nobody comes through the barrier. So you're going to hover right there and you're going to tell me what you are, and if I don't like the answer we are going to have a very fast and very loud conversation." Clear. Harry stopped where he was. It cost him nothing, and it seemed to surprise her, the stopping, as if she had braced for him to run or to charge and had no ready script for a man who simply did as he was asked while looking faintly amused about it. "Clear," he said. "Although for the record I didn't know there was a barrier. I've had a strange fortnight. What I am is complicated, and I'll tell you the whole of it, but I'd rather not shout my life story across 40 feet of air over a city that's trying to sleep. My name's Harry. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I caught a boat earlier. Ask anyone in London." "London," she repeated, and something moved behind her eyes, a recalibration. "You're not on the League's registry. You're not in any database I can pull, and I can pull a lot of them. Your heartbeat doesn't match any species I've got filed, and I've got most of them filed. And you talk like you fell out of a different century." She drifted closer, near enough now that he could see that her eyes were a blue so bright it looked deliberate, and that she was younger than the authority in her voice, younger than the set of her shoulders, a person who had been handed an enormous responsibility before she was finished being a kid and had decided to be equal to it through sheer force of will. "So you understand my problem. A man drops out of a sealed sky over my city glowing and tells me his name is Harry and he caught a boat. I want very badly to believe you. Believing strangers is sort of my whole brand. But the last 3 times something came through a barrier that shouldn't open, my cousin spent a week putting a city back together." "Your cousin," Harry said slowly, and a piece of the wrong sky clicked into place. The bright vast thing over the Atlantic, the flying lights, a world that had heroes in it already. "There's more than one of you." She looked at him as if he had asked whether water was wet, and then her expression changed, because she had heard the genuine not knowing in it, and a person whose whole brand was believing strangers knew the sound of an honest question. "You really don't know where you are," she said. It was not quite a question. "I really don't. This morning I was over Yorkshire. I went up to look at a smudge in the stars, and I came out the other side into a sky with the constellations rearranged. And there was something over the ocean so bright it made my old scar ache, and then there was you. I take it as a genuine kindness," Harry said, "if you tell me the name of this city." I've been pretending I'm not unnerved for about an hour and it's wearing thin. She studied him for a long moment, and whatever calculus ran behind those bright eyes resolved in his favor, because she let her fists open the rest of the way and floated up level with him, close enough now that they were two people having a conversation rather than two combatants measuring range. Metropolis, she said. You're over Metropolis. It's the 3rd of June and you're on Earth, and if that sentence means something different to you than it does to me, then we have got a lot to talk about. I'm Kara. A beat. Supergirl, if you've heard the name, you haven't heard the name. I have not heard the name, Harry agreed. But I like it, it's direct. Mine's just Harry Potter, which back home meant rather more than it should have, and here I'm guessing means nothing at all, and I cannot tell you how restful that is. And Kara Zor-El, who had spent the better part of 2 years being the most recognized face in a city of 11 million and had forgotten what anonymity felt like, surprised herself by laughing. She took him to a diner. It was, Harry would reflect later, a profoundly sane decision in the middle of a profoundly insane night, and it told him more about Kara than an hour of fighting would have. She did not take him to a cell or a containment facility, or whatever the League used for unexplained men who fell out of the sky. She took him to an all-night diner on the edge of the warehouse district, a chrome and vinyl place with a counter and 6 booths, and a waitress who called Kara Hun without looking up from her crossword, and she slid into a booth and ordered 2 coffees and a stack of pancakes and gestured for Harry to sit, and the ordinary humanity of it nearly undid him. You're staring, Kara observed. Sorry, it's just... He looked around at the warm light and the steam off the coffee and the waitress's crossword. Where I'm from, when something inexplicable shows up, we tend to point a great many wands at it first and ask questions through a sheet of enchanted glass later. You bought it pancakes. You said you weren't here to hurt anyone, and I believed you, and a person who's just been told his whole world rearranged itself probably hasn't eaten. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, and Harry noticed that she did it carefully, as he had learned to do everything carefully in the last week, a person managing a strength that could crush porcelain without noticing. My cousin would have done the Celan glass thing. He loves me, but he runs cold when he's scared, and new powers scare him, because the last new power that showed up unannounced put him through a building. I run hot. I'd rather find out who you are over pancakes and be wrong sometimes than treat everybody like a threat and be lonely all the time. She said it lightly, but it was not a light thing, and they both knew it. So Harry Potter, from a world with wands, so he talked. He told her the truth, all of it, because he had spent a lifetime managing what people knew about him, and he was tired, bone tired, of the management. He told her about the war he had fought at 17 against a man who had murdered his parents and split his own soul into pieces to escape death. He told her about the years after, the medals and the speeches and the slow, suffocating sense of being a monument while still alive. He told her about the vault and the shard and the light that had recognized something in him, and about the hawk and the moor and the boat. He told her that he did not know what he was now, a wizard with a star inside him or a star wearing a wizard's history, and that he had crossed into her sky by accident chasing a smudge in the constellations, and that the brightest thing over her ocean had looked at him, and he had felt it the way prey feels a shadow. Kara listened the way very few people had ever listened to him, which was completely, without performing sympathy and without waiting for her turn to speak, her pancakes going cold while she turned each piece of his story over and set it carefully down. When he got to the bright thing over the Atlantic, though, her whole demeanor changed and the warmth went hard and bright at the edges. Describe it again, she said. The thing over the water, exactly. Vast, brighter than anything around it, but not like a sun, more like a hole burned in the night that light poured out of. It wasn't on the ground or in the high air. It was somewhere else and looking through, and when it noticed me, it didn't feel curious. It felt like being inventoried. He watched her face. You know what it is. I know what it might be, and I really hope I'm wrong, and I'm almost never wrong about this particular thing. She pushed her plate aside. There's a place. Another world. We call it Apocalypse, and the thing that rules it is the closest thing this universe has to a god of cruelty. And his name is Darkseid, and he doesn't notice people, Harry. He doesn't have the bandwidth for curiosity. If he looked at you, it's because something about you registered on a scale he cares about, and the only scale he cares about is power. And the only reason he files a new power is to decide whether to recruit it, neutralize it, or break it. She met his eyes. You crossed into our universe on a beam of light that came from a dead alien empire, carrying enough raw force to make a god take inventory. That's not a strange fortnight. That's the opening move of something. The waitress refilled their coffees. Outside, the city did its low electric hum. Harry sat with the weight of it, the way you sit with the news that the lump is not nothing, and found, examining himself, that the dominant thing he felt was not fear. Then I'm glad I landed here, he said, and not over an empty field somewhere with no Kara to buy me pancakes and tell me the name of the god who's measuring me. He turned his mug a quarter turn on the table, a small grounding motion. Where I'm from, I spent a war being the only one who could do the thing that needed doing, and being told constantly how special that made me, and never once feeling anything but alone in a crowd. I'd much rather be measured by a god in a world that has people like you in it than be safe and singular in a world that doesn't. That probably sounds mad. It sounds, Kara said, like the first completely sane thing you've said all night. And she smiled at him, fully this time, no calculation left in it, the smile of someone who had been alone in her own particular way for a long time and had just heard a stranger describe the inside of her own chest. Okay. Harry Potter from the world with wands, finish your coffee. If a god's taking inventory, you're going to want to meet some people and you're going to want to be able to do more than catch boats. And I'm going to want to see exactly what you can do because I have not been this curious about anything in a really long time. What he could do, it turned out, was keep up with her, and almost nobody could keep up with her. She tested him over the bay at dawn, where the only witnesses were gulls and a container ship too far out to make sense of two streaks of light racing each other above the waterline. She had not framed it as a test, exactly. She had said come on and pushed off the diner roof and shot out over the water, and Harry had understood that come on was the test, that Kara learned about people by how they moved with her, and he had grinned and gone after her. And for the next hour the two of them turned the sky over Metropolis Bay into something between a sparring match and a dance. She was fast. She was faster than he was at first, because she had been doing this since she was a teenager and he had been doing it for a week. And she used the difference the way a good fighter uses any advantage, ruthlessly and with obvious delight, peeling away from him at the last instant, looping behind him, tapping him once between the shoulder blades and calling tag before he could correct. But Harry had not survived a war by being slow to learn, and he had a thing she did not have, which was the wand. The third time she lined up to tap him, he stopped flying. Just stopped dead in the air and let her overshoot. And as she flashed past, he flicked his wand and a sheet of frictionless ice formed across the air in front of her, conjured and cushioned and angled, and Kara hit it and skidded sideways across 50 feet of empty sky with an expression of pure astonishment before she got her flight back under her. What, she demanded, hanging in the air and staring at the slab of ice now melting into rain over the bay, was that? Magic, Harry said, drifting up to her, entirely too pleased with himself. You're faster than me, you'll be faster than me for a while. But you're going to find that I cheat, and that I cheat in ways nobody in your universe has ever seen because nobody in your universe grew up doing this. He twirled the wand once between his fingers and it became, for an instant, a small sleek falcon, then a wand again. Strength and speed and the rest of it you've got me matched or beaten on, but I've got 11 years of a completely different discipline layered underneath, and the two halves talk to each other now. Watch, he showed her. He flew straight up fast, and at the top of the climb he cast a disillusionment charm and vanished, light bending around him. And Kara's head snapped around as she lost him from sight and from her hearing both, because he had wrapped a muffliato into the same gesture and silenced his own heartbeat to her ears. She hung in the air alone, suddenly, in a way that clearly unsettled her, and Harry let it last 3 seconds before he dropped the charms a foot from her shoulder. Boo, he said. She shrieked and shoved him, and he let himself be shoved a good 30 feet because the look on her face was worth it, the outrage and the delight all tangled up, a person who was almost never surprised discovering that she could be. You disappeared, she said, flying back to him. Not just optically, I lost your heartbeat. I have never, not once, lost a heartbeat I was tracking. People can't hide from me, you just hid from me. And you can fly circles around me and lift a ship I'd struggle with, and you've been doing it half your life, Harry said. Which is sort of the point, isn't it? Apart, we've each got holes the other doesn't. Together. He spread his hands. I've spent my whole life being the only one who could do my particular trick. I think I'm done being the only one. I think I'd rather have someone to cheat alongside. He did not get to find out what she would have said to that, because the city chose that moment to start screaming. They heard it together, a half-second apart, her ears a fraction quicker than his. A shriek of tearing steel from the riverfront rail yard, then the deep, wrong groan of a structure deciding to fail, then the human note under it. The panic of people who have just realized the ground is no longer a thing they can rely on. Kara was already moving. Harry went after her, and this time he did not have to chase, because she had slowed without seeming to, dropping into a glide that let him pull level, and that small thing, the deliberate slowing so they would arrive together, told him more about how she fought than the whole hour of sparring had. The rail yard came up beneath them in ruin and progress. An elevated freight gantry, a half-mile of welded truss carrying a loaded maglev line 40 feet above the yard, had buckled at a support pier, and the buckle was traveling, each failing joint loading the next, the whole span beginning the slow unzipping that would bring 1,000 tons of steel, and a packed early commuter train down onto the yard crews working below. Harry took it in as he had learned to read a battlefield all at once and in order of lethality. The train, 8 cars, perhaps 400 people, sliding now as the deck tilted, the yard crew, a dozen workers directly underneath the failing pier which had maybe 20 seconds left in it. "Train or the span," he called. "I've got the train, you can't stop a derail you've never felt before, trust me," Kara shouted back, and she was right, and he did, peeling off toward the tilting cars. "The span comes down on 12 people in yellow vests in about 15 seconds. Can you hold a bridge, wizard?" "Let's find out," Harry said and dropped. He could have caught the span as he had caught the boat, with his back and his arms and brute force, and a week ago he would have. But a week of the moor had taught him that brute force was the least of what he now was, and the boat had taught him that the city would film whatever he did, and some stubborn instinct told him that the answer to a failing bridge was not to become a bridge, but to keep the bridge from failing. So as he fell into the gap beneath the buckling span, he drew the wand, and he reached for the oldest and most reflexive piece of magic he owned, the one he had cast 1,000 times to keep a falling broom rider or a tumbling friend from breaking on the ground, and he cast it not on a person but on the entire half-mile of steel. "Arresto momentum," Harry said, and put a star's worth of will behind it. The spell was built to slow a single falling body. He fed it the strength that had held 100 drowning passengers on his palms, and it caught the whole collapsing span the way a held breath catches a sob, the 1,000 tons of steel decelerating into a groaning, grinding crawl, the deck sinking now in slow motion, joints failing one by one but gently, the catastrophe drained of its speed if not its mass. The yard crew scattered out from underneath, screaming, alive. And Harry hung in the gap with his wand up and his teeth bared, holding a half-mile of dying bridge in the cupped hands of a Hogwarts charm, and felt the magic and the starfire pour out of him together, no seam between them, more power than he had ever spent at once, and felt distantly that there was still more where it came from. Above him, Kara took the train. She got under the lead car as it slid off the tilting rail, and she did not try to stop it dead, because she knew better. She redirected it, flying backward up the failing grade with the whole 8-car train pressing down on her shoulders and her hands flat against the coupling, bleeding off its momentum into a long shrieking deceleration that walked it back from a 400-person derailment to a hard, survivable stationary stop. Sparks fountained off the rails. A window cracked. Nobody died. When she set the last car down level and safe on the one surviving stretch of intact track, the passengers inside were screaming and weeping and very much alive, and Kara hung in the air above the saved train, breathing hard, hair full of sparks, and looked down through the gap at Harry holding the entire ruined span in a fist of light. "Okay," she called down, and her voice cracked with something that was half adrenaline and half pure joy. "Okay, the slowing spell, we're going to talk about the slowing spell. That is the most useful thing I have ever seen a person do. Can you put it down without dropping it on anyone? Give me a clear patch and I'll lay it down like a tablecloth," Harry called back, and she flew the yard in 3 seconds, herding the last stragglers clear, and signaled, and Harry let the span descend the rest of the way, slow as a sigh, until a half-mile of mangled steel settled into the empty yard with a long, low complaint of metal and went still. No one under it, no one in the train. A dozen yellow vests standing in a stunned cluster, staring up at the 2 figures in the dawn sky who had, between them, in under a minute, turned a mass casualty disaster into a very bad morning and an insurance claim. Harry rose back up through the gap, and Kara met him halfway, and for a moment they simply hung there over the saved yard with the sun coming up and the sirens starting in the distance, grinning at each other like a pair of idiots, and Harry thought that he had fought beside brave people his whole life and had never once felt this particular thing. This clean, uncomplicated rightness of having caught the thing that was falling together, each of them holding the half the other could not. "Your trouble," Kara informed him, breathless. "You said you cheat. You didn't say you could catch a bridge with a magic word." "I'm full of surprises," Harry said. "I'd rather have someone to cheat alongside. I think I mentioned that right before the city interrupted." Kara looked at him, hair whipping in the high wind off the bay, the dawn coming up gold behind her and turning the whole sky the color of the thing that had remade him. And Harry was struck with the suddenness of weather by how much he did not want this hour to end. It was not only that she was beautiful, though she was, in a clean, unstudied way that had nothing to do with effort. It was that she was the first person in years who had looked at the impossible thing he had become and responded not with fear or worship or appetite, but with delight, with "come on," with "let's see what you've got." She had met his power with her own and made a game of it. No one had ever made a game of it. "I had you pegged the second you stopped dead in the air back there," she said. You've got that thing my cousin's friends have, the quiet ones, where they're polite and funny and reasonable right up until the moment they decide something matters, and then there's no moving them at all. She narrowed her eyes. Voldemort, the soul-splitting murderer, you fought him at 17. How'd that end? He's dead, Harry said. I made sure of it. Why? Because you flinched when you said his name in the diner just a little, and you don't flinch at anything else, and I noticed. A god noticed you the second you crossed over. I'd put money on the dead man not staying as dead as you'd like. She said it gently, but she said it, and Harry understood that under the warmth and the come-on, Kara Zor-El was as sharp as anyone he had ever fought beside, that the brightness was not naivety but a choice made by someone who saw the dark perfectly well and had decided to be a light in it anyway. Was, he thought, the most attractive thing he had encountered in years, and he was in real danger here, and he found he did not mind that either. You're not wrong to worry about him, Harry admitted. I came through on the same beam of light that a piece of him might have. I've been trying not to think about it. But there are worse problems today than a dead man's leftovers, and one of them apparently has a throne on a planet called Apocalypse, so. He turned in the air to face the rising sun. What happens now? You said I should meet people. How does one go about meeting the people who fight gods? Carefully, Kara said. And usually after they've already decided you're a threat and shown up to assess you, which, knowing my luck and your timing, is going to be approximately. She tilted her head, listening to something far off that Harry, focusing, caught a half-second later. A displacement in the high air to the east, fast and controlled and heavy with intent, an aircraft that was not an aircraft inbound on Metropolis at a speed that meant business. Now, okay, new plan. Don't fly at anybody, keep your hands visible, let me do the talking, and whatever you do, do not be clever at the woman who's about to land, because she invented being clever and she's got a sword. A sword, Harry repeated. A sword, Kara confirmed, and a rope that makes you tell the truth, and about 3,000 years of practice at deciding whether new things get to keep existing. Be normal, Harry. I am famously incapable of being normal, Harry said, but I'll try, and he turned with Kara to face the east, where a craft of impossible design was decelerating out of the dawn, and behind it, riding the air without any craft at all, came a figure in red and blue and gold with a lasso of light at her hip and her dark hair streaming. And Harry Potter got his first look at Wonder Woman and understood, the way you understand a thunderstorm before it arrives, that his strange fortnight was about to get considerably stranger. The craft set down on the deck of an abandoned grain terminal that thrust out into the bay, and the woman in red and blue did not. She came to a halt in the air 20 feet up and considered the two of them, and the consideration had weight, the unhurried assessing weight of someone who had outlived empires and learned to take the measure of a new thing before it had finished introducing itself. Kara, she said. The voice was low and even and carried the same effortless authority Kara's had, but older, with a formality worn smooth by centuries. You did not report a barrier breach. I was getting to it, Kara said. I wanted to know what I was reporting first. Diana, this is Harry. He came through about 6 hours ago. He's the most powerful thing I've personally stood next to that wasn't related to me, and he caught a boat full of people in a different universe before lunch, and he hasn't lied to me once, and I've been listening for it. So before anybody draws anything. She drifted half a length in front of Harry, not quite shielding him but making a point of where she stood. He's mine. I found him. I vouch for him. Diana's gaze moved from Kara to Harry and stayed there, and Harry held it, because he had been stared at by Dumbledore and by Voldemort and by a hall full of people deciding whether he was a savior or a liar, and he had learned that you did not win a staring contest with someone like this by trying to win it. You won it by having nothing to hide, so he let her look. He let her see the wand loose in his hand, pointed at nothing, and the steadiness of him, and the fact that he had positioned himself to protect Kara without seeming to notice he had done it, his body angled a few degrees between her and the newcomer. You are armed, Diana said to him. I'm always armed, Harry said. It's a stick, it's pointed at the deck. I've had it 11 years, and I've never once drawn it on someone who didn't draw on me first, and I don't intend to start with someone Kara clearly respects. He inclined his head, a small courtesy. You're Diana. Kara says you've got a rope that makes people tell the truth. I'll save you the trouble. Use it. Ask me anything. I've got nothing I'm protecting badly enough to lie about, and I'd rather you trust me because you've tested me than because I was charming. Something shifted in Diana's expression, a flicker of reassessment, and Harry recognized it because he had felt the same flicker himself an hour ago over the bay, the surprise of meeting someone who simply declined to play the expected game. She unhooked the lasso from her hip and it uncoiled glowing into the air, and she looked at him with new attention. Most people, she observed, do not invite the lasso. Most people have something to hide, Harry said. I had something to hide for about 20 years and it nearly killed me, and I've decided I'm finished with it. throw the rope. Let's get the part where you don't trust me over with, so we can get to the part where you tell me what a god named Darkseid wants with the man who fell out of the sky." And Diana of Themyscira, who had stood in judgment over gods and monsters and the occasional well-meaning fool, looked at the young man hanging in the dawn light over Metropolis Bay with his impossible power held so lightly and his terrible honesty offered up like an open hand, and felt the first stir of something she had not felt in a very long time, which was the desire to know how a story ended. She cast the lasso. It settled glowing around Harry's wrist, warm and weightless, and he did not flinch from it, and she asked her first question in a voice like a verdict, and the truth that came back to her was, every word of it, exactly what he had already said. She asked him whether he meant the city harm, and the rope let him answer number. She asked him whether he sought power, dominion, worship, the things she had spent 3,000 years learning to hear underneath the careful words of men, and the rope let him answer that he had been handed more power than he had ever wanted and would have given a great deal to want it less. She asked him last in a quieter voice what he was afraid of, and the rope held him, and Harry found that he could not give the easy answer, the Darkseid answer, the Voldemort answer, because the rope wanted the true one. "Being alone in it," he said, and the words came out of him with the rope's terrible gentleness, stripped of all his usual armor. "I've been the only one who could do the thing my whole life. I'm tired of being the only one. That's what I'm afraid of. That I'll be the strongest person in every room I ever walk into and still be the loneliest, all the way to the end." The lasso dimmed. Diana drew it back in slowly, and the glow faded from the cord as it coiled onto her hip, and she regarded Harry with the particular stillness of a woman revising a conclusion she had arrived at before landing. Beside him, Kara had gone very quiet and was not looking at him in quite the same way she had been an hour ago. "The truth you tell," Diana said, "is the truth you believe. That is not always the same as the truth, but it is a beginning, and it is more than most offer me." She glanced at Kara, and something passed between the two women, an old shorthand. "You spoke a name in the rope's grip that I would have you speak again, plainly, so that I am not mistaken. The one who hunted you, the one you killed." "Voldemort," Harry said. The name came easier in this sky than it ever had in his own. "He's dead. I watched it happen. I'd stake a great deal on that." "In my experience," Diana said, "the things that come through doors that should not open are precisely the things one has staked a great deal on never seeing again." She turned in the air toward the rising sun, and the gold light ran along the edge of the lasso at her hip. "You wish to meet the people who fight gods. Come then, Harry Potter, who fell out of the sky and would not lie to me. There are others who will want to take your measure, and a god across the void who already has, and we have, I think, very little time before he acts on what he has measured." She rose, and Kara rose with her, and after a breath Harry rose too, the three of them climbing together into a morning that belonged for now to no catastrophe at all. And below them Metropolis went about the ordinary miracle of a city that had not, this once, looked up in time to be afraid. They did not fly straight to the others. Diana took the lead, arrowing east toward whatever gathering place the people who fought gods used, and Harry moved to follow, and Kara caught his sleeve. It was a small thing, 2 fingers hooked in the cuff of his battered coat, but she could have torn the coat off his arm without trying, and instead she touched it like something she did not want to break, and Harry stopped in the air and let her hold him back. "Give us a minute, Diana," Kara called ahead, and the Amazon did not turn, only lifted one hand in acknowledgement and put on speed, leaving the two of them alone in a column of sunlit air a mile above the bay, the city laid out below them like something spilled from a jeweler's tray. Kara let go of his cuff. She drifted around in front of him so that they were facing, close, the wind off the water pulling at both of them, and for a moment she did not seem to know what to do with her hands, which was the first uncertain thing he had seen from her all night. "That thing you said in the rope," she said, "about being the strongest person in every room and the loneliest all the way to the end. You weren't performing. The rope doesn't let you perform. That was just true." "It was," Harry said. There seemed no point pretending otherwise, not to her, not after the rope. "I've gotten very good at not saying it. You caught me with my armor off." "I know what it sounds like," Kara said. "From the inside, that exact thing." She looked out over the water, and the brightness she wore like a uniform thinned for a moment, and something younger and rower showed underneath it. "I came here from a world that doesn't exist anymore. Everyone I was supposed to grow up with is dust on the wind between stars. I'm the second of my kind on a planet that already had one, and he's wonderful, and he's family, and he is also the reason there's no room in the sky that's only mine. Everyone looks at me and sees the smaller, later version of someone they already love. I smile a lot. I mean the smiling. But you said the thing in the rope, and I thought, there it is." He said the quiet part. "The strongest and the loneliest all the way to the end." Harry was quiet, because some things you did not answer with words, and because he had spent his life being offered comfort by people who could not actually reach the place that hurt, and he did not want to do that to her. So he did the only honest thing, which was to close the small distance between them, slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and rest his forehead against hers, the two of them hanging in the bright air with their breath mingling and their impossible hearts beating their mismatched rhythms a few inches apart. "Then here's a new thing for both of us," he said low. "I can't be put through a building. You've spent 2 years braced to lose everyone you let close, because anyone you let close can be taken from you, and I am the one person you have ever met who can't be. And you can keep up with me. You can fly as fast as I can and hit as hard as I can, and you laughed when I cheated instead of being afraid of me. And I have never, not once in my entire life, had that, so I don't know what this is yet. I'm not going to insult you by naming it after 6 hours. But I know I crossed an entire universe, and the first thing that happened was you, and I don't think I believe in that much luck. I think the light that moved me knew exactly where the door went." Kara made a sound that was half a laugh and half something with more weight in it, and she did not pull back. "You're doing the thing," she murmured. "The quiet then immovable thing. I warned myself about the quiet then immovable thing about 4 hours ago." "You did warn yourself," Harry agreed. "How's that going?" "Badly," she said, and she was smiling again, but it was a different smile, unguarded, aimed at him and no audience, and she pulled back just far enough to look at him properly, her hand coming up to rest flat against the center of his chest where she could feel the strange double rhythm of a heart that ran on starlight. "We have a god coming, you know that. Whatever this is, it's going to have to happen in the worst possible circumstances with the worst possible timing while everything's on fire." "Everything's always on fire," Harry said. "I've found you might as well fall for someone in the middle of it. The fire's the part you can count on." "That," Kara said, "is the most romantic and the most broken thing anyone has ever said to me, and I refuse to decide which one matters more right now." She took his hand off the air and laced her fingers through his, and the two of them turned east together, toward Diana and the others and the long bright shadow of the thing that was coming, and she did not let go of his hand the whole way, and Harry, who had crossed a universe expecting to be alone in it, flew into the unknown holding on to someone who could hold on back. "For the record," Kara added, as the towers of the city fell away behind them, "I still don't fully trust that your dead murderer's actually dead. And when he turns out not to be, I'm going to say I told you so in front of Diana at the worst possible moment." "I would expect nothing less," Harry said, "from someone who buys strangers pancakes," and her laugh chased them both into the morning. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Amazons measure. The people who fought gods kept their watch from a station that hung between the Earth and its moon, and Harry's first thought, when the airlock cycled and the great curved window swung the whole blue world into view, was that he had spent a week teaching himself there was no ceiling, and here was a room full of people who had built their living room past it. "You're taking that better than most," Diana observed. She had landed the craft herself, waving off the offer of an automated dock, and she stood now with her hands clasped behind her back, watching him watch the planet. "The first time the surface dwellers we bring up here see the Earth entire, they tend to need a moment. You look as though you are deciding where to put a kettle." "I flew to the edge of the atmosphere on a dare to myself 4 days ago," Harry said. "Turns out I don't breathe the way I used to, so the view's familiar, the carpet's new." He glanced at the deck plating, the soft hum of the station's systems, the discipline of the place. "And I'm trying very hard to be polite, because Kara told me to be normal. And a room full of people who could end my world is exactly the kind of room where I stop being normal and start being careful." "Careful is acceptable," said a new voice, dry and deep, and Harry turned to find a tall figure in blue regarding him from across the observation deck with eyes that had clearly already catalogued every exit and every advantage. There was no need for an introduction. The crest on the chest was the one Kara wore, made older and more certain, and the man wore it like a promise rather than a brand. "Careful is more than most arrivals manage. Kara vouches for you." "Diana withholds judgment," which from Diana is nearly an endorsement. "I'm reserving mine." "You'd be a fool not to," Harry said. "You don't know me. Kara's known me 6 hours and Diana's wrapped me in a magic rope, and you've got nothing but their word and the readout of whatever scanner you ran on me through the hull on the way in." He held the man's gaze easy, unhurried. "For what it's worth, I'm not here to take anything. I fell through a door I didn't know existed. I'd quite like to find out whether it opens both ways so I can decide whether I'm a visitor or a refugee. And in the meantime, your cousin tells me a god's been measuring me, so I'd rather spend my energy on that than on convincing 6 superheroes I'm housebroken." Something that was almost a smile crossed the man in blue. "He read the scanner," he said to Diana. Or he guessed it, I can't tell which, and that's its own kind of answer. To Harry, we'll talk, not today. Today Diana wanted you, and Diana usually gets what she wants when it comes to questions of whether a new power is a danger. That's her gift. Don't waste it. And he was gone, not flown, simply elsewhere between one blink and the next, a courtesy of speed that told Harry more about the gap between a week of practice and a lifetime of it than any lecture could have. He likes you, Diana said. He does not. He told you he was reserving judgment instead of having you removed from the station. From him that is open affection. Diana turned toward a corridor that sloped away from the observation deck. Come. There is a room I want you in, and it is not this one. The room she wanted him in was a sphere. It sat at the heart of the station, gravity-walled so that every surface was a floor, ringed with emitters that Diana explained without quite explaining. A training space built to contain people who could punch through mountains and occasionally needed to learn not to. She stepped into it ahead of him, and the door sealed, and the lights came up to a clean even white that cast no shadows. And she unhooked the last from her hip and set it deliberately on a ledge by the door, out of reach of them both. Not the rope, Harry said. Not the ropes, Diana agreed. The rope tells me what you believe. I have heard what you believe. Now I would learn what you are, and a man's truth and a man's nature are not the same document. The rope cannot show me how you move when you are frightened, or whether you reach for cruelty when you are losing, or whether the power you carry so lightly has taught your hands habits your words have not caught up to. Only this can show me that. She raised her fists, and the bracers on her forearms caught the light. You will spar with me. You will not hold back out of courtesy, because courtesy in a fight is a lie I will see through, and a lie is the one thing I will not forgive in this room. And I will not hold back either. Are we agreed? You're going to hit me to find out who I am. I am going to hit you, Diana said, and watch what you do with being hit. Yes, it is the oldest examination my people have. We trust hands over tongues. Tongues were invented to deceive. Hands were invented to build and to break, and a person reveals which they prefer the instant they are tested. She tilted her head. You are smiling. I spent 7 years at a school where the headmaster's idea of preparing children for a war was to make us solve riddles, Harry said, rolling his shoulders, setting the wand on the same ledge as her lasso, a deliberate echo, weapons set aside together. An honest fistfight to settle the question of whether I'm trustworthy is the most refreshing thing anyone's proposed to me in years. Try to keep up. He had perhaps half a second to enjoy the line before she was on him. Diana did not fight the way the rail yard disaster had fought, all mass and momentum. She fought like an argument, each strike a premise that demanded an answer, and Harry, who had dueled for his life as a teenager and had thought he understood combat, discovered inside the first 3 exchanges that he had been a brawler playing at a discipline she had spent 3,000 years perfecting. She was not as strong as he was. She did not need to be. She took the strength he had and folded it back against him, redirecting a blow that could have cratered a city block into the empty air, stepping inside his reach, putting him on the defensive with nothing but angle and timing and the absolute economy of someone who had never once in her long life thrown a wasted motion. So he stopped trying to win on strength, because she had already shown him that strength alone would lose, and he started to think. That was the thing the war had actually taught him, underneath the riddles, that the board was always larger than the pieces, that the person who won was usually the person who changed the rules first. He had a body that could fly and a discipline she had never trained against, and he had been an idiot to fight her on the ground she owned. So the next time she stepped inside his reach, he simply stopped standing on the floor. He went up fast, breaking the geometry of the exchange, and as she adjusted, he cast wandless and wordless, a thing he had only recently learned he could do, and the gravity in her immediate vicinity stuttered. A levicorpus pitched at the floor itself rather than at her, and for one instant Diana of the Messira floated weightless, her perfect footwork meaningless with nothing to push against. She laughed. In the middle of the spar, weightless and outmaneuvered, she laughed, delighted, and twisted in the air with a gymnast's instinct, and caught his wrist as he closed, and used his own flight against him exactly as she had used his strength. And the two of them tumbled across the sphere in a tangle that ended with her forearm a controlled half-inch from his throat and his palm flat against her sternum, glowing faintly, a heat blast he had pulled the instant before it formed. Stalemate. Each of them one decision from ending the other, and neither of them taking it. They hung there, breathing, her dark hair a corona around them both in the no-gravity of the sphere's center, close enough that he could see the flecks of bronze in her eyes and the old white seam of a scar at her hairline that 3,000 years had not quite erased. You changed the rules, Diana said. She did not move the forearm from his throat. He did not move the palm from her sternum. You were going to win the fight I was having, Harry said, so I stopped having that fight. It's the only trick I've ever really had. Everyone always assumes the game they've set is the only game. It usually isn't. No, Diana agreed softly. It usually is not. Something had changed in how she looked at him. The assessment burned down to its embers and something else kindling in the ash. Harry was becoming aware in a way that complicated everything, magnificent, not in the manner of a thing to be admired from a distance, but in the manner of a peer, a person who had met the full weight of him and answered it without flinching and then laughed in the middle of it. He had known her for an afternoon. He was in a great deal of trouble, and the trouble had a shape now, and the shape was 3 women in 2 days, and he was honest enough with himself to know that the thing forming in his chest was not going to be tidy. You fight, she said, the way you spoke in the last. You do not reach for cruelty when you are losing, you reach for cleverness. That is rarer than you know. I have sparred with kings who, the instant they began to lose, reached for the throat. She lowered her arm at last, and they drifted apart, and the gravity of the sphere caught them gently and set them both on a curved white floor that her instincts immediately treated as down. You may keep existing, Harry Potter. Was that ever in question? With me, it is always in question, Diana said, retrieving the lasso, handing him his wand with a gravity that made the small gesture into something formal. It is the question I exist to ask. Most men I ask it to fail in the end on cruelty. You did not, so the verdict is rendered, and now I will tell you the thing I brought you up here to tell you away from the others, because it is mine to carry, and I would rather not watch them decide how much of it to believe. Her voice dropped, and the laughter went out of it. Apocalypse is moving. I have fought its master before. I know the smell of it, the way the air bends before the door fire opens. It has been bending for 3 days, since I would wager the hour you crossed over. She showed him on a display in a quiet briefing room that wrapped the data around them in light, what 3 days of a god's attention looked like. Disappearances first, the kind that did not make the news. A research station in the Arctic gone silent, a freighter's crew vanished off a ship still under power, the small quiet harvesting of people that Apocalypse did when it wanted raw material and did not yet want to be seen wanting it. Then the energy signatures, faint at the edges of the planet's magnetic field, the characteristic scorch of boom tube residue, doors being opened and closed in the high dark, scouts coming through and going back, mapping, measuring. And then 18 hours ago, the first one that had not gone back. A paradement, Diana said, and brought up the image, a thing of leather wings and a gas-masked face and a body built for nothing but obedience and violence. One, alone. They are never alone, they are a hive, they are a single will wearing 10,000 bodies. One coming through and remaining is not a scout, it is a question, he is asking what will answer. He's fishing, Harry said. He dropped a hook in the water to see what bites. He wants to know if the new power he measured is the kind that comes when something screams. He looked at the image, at the wretched engineered misery of the thing, and felt the old familiar tug, the one that had walked him into a vault past a parking violation sign. Where is it now? Hunting a town in the Carpathians, Diana said, slowly, deliberately. It has killed no one yet. It is being watched, and it knows it is being watched, and it is performing its cruelty for an audience it hopes to draw out. She turned to him. I did not bring you up here only to test you, Harry. I brought you up here because the audience it hopes to draw out is you. Darkseid wishes to see the new power respond to suffering, because that is how he will learn to use it against you. If you go, you tell him exactly who you are. If you do not go, a town dies to teach you a lesson about going. That's not a choice, Harry said. You know that's not a choice. You'd have already gone if it were yours alone to make. I have gone in the past, and it has cost more than I will say. Diana's jaw was steady, her eyes on the image of the thing in the mountains. I am telling you the price so that you pay it with open eyes rather than closed ones. If you fly to that town, you save it, and you announce yourself to a god, and everything after becomes harder and faster and more terrible than it would otherwise have been. That is the trade. I will not make it for you, and I will not pretend it is simple, because pretending hard things are simple is how the young get themselves killed believing they were being brave. Harry looked at the wretched winged thing, performing its slow cruelty in the mountains of a country that, in his own universe, he had once visited on a school holiday. And he thought about a girl in a hospital bed who had stood 9 days in a column of light because no one with the power to open a door had been willing to read the letters. He thought about the principle he had carried into a body that could level mountains, and how the body had not changed the principle, only made it harder to ignore. Then it's already decided, he said. It was decided before you finished the sentence. I'd rather a god learn who I am from the fact that I came than from the fact that I didn't. Let him measure that. Let him measure a man who hears a town screaming and shows up. If that's a weakness he thinks he can use, he's welcome to try to use it. People have been trying to use that particular weakness against me since I was 11. It hasn't gone well for them. He met her eyes, but I'd rather not go alone. Kara offered me someone to fight beside. You offered me an honest fight and a verdict. I'm asking both of you, come to the mountains with me. Diana looked at him for a long moment, and the thing that had kindled in the ashes of her assessment burned a little brighter, and she inclined her head, the same grave, formal gesture she had used to hand him back his wand. I had hoped, she said, you would ask. The town in the Carpathians was called something Harry could not pronounce and would not forget. and the parademan was waiting for them in its square when they came down out of the dusk, Kara and Diana and Harry, 3 falling lights, and the thing looked up at them with its blank gas-masked face and made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a horn, the sound of a hive recognizing that its hook had caught. "It called home the instant it saw us," Kara said low, hovering at Harry's shoulder. "I can hear the tube charging. Wherever this goes, it goes loud." "Then we make it quick and we make it clear," Diana said, the lasso already loose and glowing in her hand. "We are not here to fight a war tonight. We are here to take its hook out of the water and leave nothing for it to report but failure. Harry, the town first, always the town first. Let it watch us choose the people over the kill. That is its own kind of message." And it was, Harry would think later, the truest thing anyone taught him in those first strange days, that the way you fought told your enemy more than the fact that you won. They did not engage the parademan. They emptied the town around it. Kara was a blur through the streets, pulling families out of houses and into the safety of the hills faster than the eye could track. Diana stood between the thing and the fleeing people, a wall of bronze and wool that it could not pass, and Harry walked into the square toward it, slow, unhurried, his hands open and empty and his wand nowhere in sight, and let it come to him. It came. Of course it came. It was built to. It crossed the square in a thunder of leather wings and engineered hate, and Harry did not raise a shield or throw a blast or do any of the things it had been sent to provoke and record. He simply caught it, one hand closing around the haft of the weapon it swung and the other flat against the center of its chest, and he held it there immobile, the full obscene strength of an apocalyptic war thing meeting a star that had decided not to move, and he looked into the blank lenses of its mask and spoke to the god he knew was listening through them. "I know you can hear me," Harry said, conversational, almost kind. "So here's your measurement. You sent this to town to see what I'd do. What I did was empty the town first and fight it second, because the town was always the point and the fight never was. You wanted to know if suffering is the lever that moves me. It is. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise, but it doesn't move me the way you're hoping. It doesn't make me reckless. It makes me arrive." He tightened his grip and the war thing's weapon crumpled in his fist like foil. "You're going to come for this world. I've been told that since the hour I got here. When you do, you'll find that the lever you think you found is the one thing you can't pull, because the moment you make a single person suffer to bait me, you've told me exactly where to be. Send better scouts. This one's going home with a message." He did not kill it. He bound it instead, wand back in his hand in a blink, a cocoon of conjured force around the thing that no parademan had ever been built to break, and he set it down in the empty square as the boom tube finally tore open above the town, a circle of fire and screaming geometry, and through it, for one instant, Harry felt the full weight of the attention on the far side, the cold geological patience taking its inventory, filing what it had seen. Then Kara was beside him and Diana on his other side, the 3 of them shoulder to shoulder beneath the burning door. The saved town emptied into the safe hills behind them, and the tube hung there a moment longer as if the god behind it were deciding whether tonight was the night. It was not. The door collapsed inward and was gone, taking its bound and failed scout with it, and the dusk came back over the mountains, ordinary and cold and full of stars that were not Harry's stars, and the 3 of them stood in the empty square and let themselves breathe. "He felt that," Kara said. "What you said, he felt it. I don't know how I know, but I do." "Good," Harry said. "I meant him to." Diana said nothing for a moment. She was looking at him with the embers fully kindled now, the verdict long since rendered and something past the verdict in its place. And when she spoke it was quiet, and only to him, though Kara stood close enough to hear and did not pretend she hadn't. "You spoke to a god as an equal," Diana said, "and you did it to protect a town whose name you cannot say. I have lived 3,000 years, Harry Potter. I have met perhaps 4 beings who could have stood under that door and not blinked. Not one of them would have used the moment to talk about reading letters." She reached out and laid her hand briefly against his jaw, a touch as formal and as deliberate as everything else she did, and as unmistakable. "I find that I am no longer reserving judgment." They flew back toward the station the long way, by unspoken agreement, climbing slowly out of the dusk over the mountains so that the saved town fell away beneath them, and the curve of the world came up gold and blue at the edge of the dark. Kara flew on Harry's left and Diana on his right, and for a while none of them spoke, because there are silences after a near thing that are better than any conversation, the silence of people who have stood together under something terrible and come out the other side still themselves. Harry let it hold. He had spent his whole life filling silences, performing reassurance, managing the people around him so they would not see how thin his own composure was worn. He found, climbing through the cold, bright air between 2 women who had each met the full weight of him and not looked away, that he did not need to manage anything at all. "You did the thing again," Kara said at last, conversational, her bright voice carrying easily across the gap of air. "The reading people thing to a god this time. You stood under his door and talked to him like you'd already seen the inside of him. Diana, did you catch that? He does it to gods now." "I caught it," Diana said. "I have been cataloging it since the bay. It is the single most dangerous thing about him, and he appears to have no idea. She glanced across at Harry, the bronze flecks in her eyes catching the last of the light. You spoke to Darkseid with something perilously close to pity. I would caution you against being heard to pity that one aloud, where the others can mark it. They will think it weakness. It is not weakness, but it will frighten them because they have spent years learning to hate him, and you looked at him for a moment and found something underneath the hate, and people do not forgive you quickly for showing them there is an underneath. I know, Harry said. I've spent my whole life being the person who insists there's an underneath. It's never made me popular. It's just made me write slightly more often than the people who don't. He looked out at the turning world. I'm not going to pretend I don't pity him. He's the most powerful thing in 2 universes, and he's organized all of it around not having to feel something. That's the loneliest arrangement I've ever heard of, and I've been lonely in some fairly committed ways. Doesn't mean I won't stop him. You can pity a thing and still put your whole self between it and everyone it would hurt. Those aren't opposites. People keep thinking they're opposites. Kara was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again, the brightness had gone soft at the edges. That's the thing you said in the rope, isn't it, without saying it? The strongest and the loneliest. You look at him and you see the worst possible version of the thing you've been afraid of your whole life. A person so strong nobody ever reached the inside of them until there wasn't an inside left worth reaching. Yeah, Harry admitted. That's exactly the thing I said in the rope. He glanced at her and at Diana past her, the 2 of them flanking him in the gold dark. Which is why it matters that I'm not doing it alone. He's the proof of where the road goes if you walk it by yourself. I'd rather take the long way back from a saved town with the 2 of you than be the strongest thing in any sky and end up like him. He let a breath of frost fall sparkling toward the distant ground. Come on, Diana's right, we should report before the others decide we've defected. And I want to be in the room when I tell Karen I talked to God into a staring contest. I have a feeling about Karen's face. You have not met Karen, Diana said with the ghost of the comet smile. But you're correct about the face. And they climbed together into the dark toward the station that hung between the earth and its moon, 3 lights rising out of a dusk that belonged, for one more evening, to no catastrophe at all. They debriefed in the briefing room that wrapped the data around them in light, and Superman was there when they returned, standing at the curved window with the earth turning below him and an expression that had revised itself somewhere in the last 2 hours. You bound it and sent it back, he said without turning. He had watched the whole thing, of course. The station saw everything. You stood under an open boom tube with Darkseid himself on the other side of it, and you used the time to lecture him about ethics. Do you have any idea how many beings in this universe would have taken that opening to do something stupid and loud and final? I wasn't trying to be brave, Harry said. I was trying to be clear. There's a difference, and it matters with someone like him. Brave is a thing you do for an audience. Clear is a thing you do to set the terms. I wanted him to know exactly what kind of enemy he'd made, so that when he plans against me, he plans against the real thing and not against whatever he assumed a new power would be. He came to stand beside the man in blue, and the 2 of them looked at the planet together, the whole fragile lit-up sphere of it. You've fought him before. Tell me I'm wrong? You're not wrong, Superman admitted. That's what unsettles me. Darkseid's weapon isn't his strength, though his strength is real. His weapon is that he's patient enough to learn you, and once he's learned you, he builds the one machine you can't refuse. He has an equation, Harry, the anti-life equation. It's not a metaphor. It's a thing he spent eternity trying to complete, a mathematical proof that free will is a lie, and if he ever finishes it and speaks it aloud, every mind that hears it stops belonging to itself. He doesn't want to rule the world. Ruling is work. He wants to switch it off. He wants to reach into every skull on every world and turn the lights down to a single obedient gray. He glanced sideways. You told him suffering makes you arrive. I believe you, but understand what you've done. You've told the patient God exactly which lever to spin the next year machining. I know, Harry said. I made that trade with my eyes open. Diana saw to it. He felt the shape of the thing settle on him, the cost Diana had named in the mountains made real. Here's the part you're not saying. The equation works on minds, on free will. I spent 17 years fighting a man whose entire philosophy was that other people's choices didn't matter, that the strong write the rules and the weak obey them. I beat him by being a thing he couldn't model, because he literally could not conceive of someone choosing to die for someone else. Your Darkseid has the same blind spot, scaled up to a god. An equation that proves free will is a lie has one flaw built into it, and it's the same flaw every tyrant's had since the first one. It only works on people who can be convinced they have no choice. I've spent my whole life being the proof that they're wrong about that. Superman was quiet for a moment. Then slowly he extended his hand and Harry took it, and the grip that could crush a mountain range was careful and exact and entirely sincere. Welcome to Earth, Superman said. I hope you stay a visitor and not a refugee. But if it's a refugee, you've picked a decent planet to be stranded on, and we could use you on it. Reserve withdrawn. And then he was gone again, elsewhere between blinks, leaving Harry with the distinct sense of having passed a more important examination than the one in the sphere. Kara found him on the observation deck an hour later, where he had gone to be alone with the turning planet and the size of what he had walked into. He gave you the handshake, she said, settling onto the bench beside him, close her shoulder against his. He doesn't give the handshake. He gave you the handshake on day one. I've been here 2 years and I still mostly get the nod. She bumped him gently. How are you doing? Real answer, not the clear and not brave thing you do for gods. Honestly, Harry watched a weather system the size of a country turn slowly over an ocean he had no name for. I've been on this world for 1 day, and I've caught a train, met 3 of the most formidable people I've ever encountered, sparred a woman who's older than my entire civilization, declared war on a god, and I have not, for 1 single hour of it, felt like the loneliest person in the room. I keep waiting for the part where being this powerful makes everyone hold me at arm's length, the way it always did at home. It hasn't come. I don't trust it. It's the best I've felt in years, and I'm braced for the floor to drop out, because in my experience the floor always drops out. Yeah, Kara said softly. I know that brace, I live in that brace. She was quiet a moment. Can I tell you something and you don't get to make a joke about it, because it's the kind of thing my people used to say plainly and yours apparently buries under 6 layers of charm. I make no promises about the joke. Diana likes you. Kara said it the way the Amazon said things, flat and unembarrassed, a fact set on the table, not how she likes a worthy opponent. I watched her touch your face in the mountains. Diana doesn't touch people she's only impressed by. And here's the part you need to hear, because you're about to tie yourself in a knot over it, I know. I watched it happen and I'm not angry and I'm not staking some kind of claim, because that's not how she and I work and it's not how I want us to work. My world is gone, Harry. The customs I was raised in didn't survive the planet. But one of the things they got right, one of the things I've held on to when everything else burned, is that a heart isn't a territory. It doesn't get smaller when it's shared. It's not a thing you run out of. She looked at him steadily, the brightness and the fierceness both. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you that whatever this turns into, you don't have to do the human thing where you pick one of us and call it love and call everything else betrayal. You'll meet people who fight gods. Some of them are going to look at you the way Diana looked at you in those mountains. I'd rather you knew going in that I'm not the kind of person who needs you to make yourself smaller to prove your mind. Harry sat with that because it was an enormous thing she had set on the table. Sat there with the same fearless directness she did everything with, and because it touched the exact place the war had wounded, the place that had spent a lifetime believing love was one more thing he would eventually be asked to ration and lose. Where I'm from, he said slowly, that idea would get a person a great deal of grief, most of it from people who have never managed to love anyone properly even once. He turned to look at her, and the gold light of the earth was on her face. I'm not going to pretend I understand it yet, or that it won't be complicated, or that I'm not going to make a mess of it in ways that need forgiving. But I crossed a universe, Kara, and the first true thing I found on the other side was a person who buys strangers pancakes and means it. I'm not going to insult that by being a coward about it. He took her hand as she had taken his over the bay. Whatever this is, I'm in it with my eyes open, the same as the war with the god. I'd rather walk into the things that matter knowing the cost than tiptoe around them pretending I'm safe. Good, Kara said, and her smile was the unguarded one, the one with no audience. Because Diana's going to want to have this exact conversation with you herself in about a day, and she's much less gentle about it than I am. She'll probably make you spar again first. I look forward to losing, Harry said and meant it, and Kara laughed, and below them the earth turned, and for the length of that turning the war and the god and the patient grinding machine of the anti-life equation felt very far away. On the other side of a window, on the other side of a day that had, against every brace Harry owned, been good. Diana came to him last, when the station had dimmed to its night cycle, and Kara had gone to sleep off a day that would have flattened anyone with less than a yellow sun in their veins. She did not make him spar again. She came and stood beside him at the window, the way Superman had, the way Kara had, the turning earth seeming to be the place this station did its truth-telling, and for a while she said nothing at all, which Harry was learning was its own kind of Amazonian speech. Kara spoke to you, Diana said at last. I can see it on you. She has a way of setting a thing down so plainly that it takes the rest of us hours to pick it back up. A pause. She is right, of course. She usually is, about hearts. It is the thing she protected when her world burned, and so it is the thing she understands better than any of us who have had the luxury of keeping ours intact. She turned to face him, and the formality was still there, but something moved behind it, older than the formality and patient in a way that had nothing to do with the patience of gods. I have outlived everyone I ever permitted myself to want, Harry, every single one. It is the particular grief of my kind, and I made my peace with it long ago by the simple method of wanting less and less until I had nearly stopped. And then a man fell out of the sky who cannot be put through a building. who cannot be aged into dust while I watch, who changed the rules of a fight rather than reach for my throat, and who used the one moment a god gave him to talk about reading letters. She let the words stand. Do you understand what you are to a woman who has spent 3,000 years burying what she loves? You are the first thing in all that time that I might be permitted to keep. Harry looked at her, this woman who had judged gods and outlived empires and wanted less and less until she had nearly stopped. And he understood that she had just handed him something far more dangerous than the lasso, the unguarded truth of a heart that had armored itself against 3,000 years of loss. And he understood that the only honest response was to not be a coward about it, the same as with Kara, the same as with the god. I can't promise you forever, he said. I don't know what I am. For all I know, I age like a star and burn out in a century, or for all I know, I don't age at all, and I'm the one left standing at the end of everything. I can't promise you the thing you're most afraid of losing. He held her gaze. But I can promise you I won't make myself smaller to be loved, and I won't ask you to either, and I won't pretend the thing between us isn't real to keep it tidy. You've spent 3,000 years wanting less. I've spent my whole life being handed more power and less connection until I was the strongest and loneliest person in every room. We are, the two of us, exactly the wrong people to be careful with each other. So let's not be. And Diana of Themyscira, who had touched his face in a mountain town and reserved her judgment until there was no judgment left to reserve, smiled, a real one, rare as a comet. And she did not kiss him, not yet, because some things were better for being approached as she approached everything with deliberation and weight and the full knowledge of their cost. But she took his hand, and Kara had held his other hand over the bay that morning, and Harry Potter stood at the window of a station hung between the earth and its moon and felt, for the first time in a life spent being singular, the strange new vertigo of being wanted by people who had no intention of asking him to be less. It should have terrified him. It was, he thought, going to be a catastrophe of a particular and unprecedented kind. He found that he was looking forward to it, as he had looked forward to flying, as he had looked forward to losing to Diana, the way a person looks forward to the one good thing in a life that has taught him to expect the floor to drop. The floor, of course, was going to drop. It always did, but not tonight. And in a fire pit at the bottom of a world that was a wound, the splinter of the thing that had once been Lord Voldemort, grown now to the size of a clenched fist and beginning to remember the shape of a voice, heard through the hive mind's report a name spoken in a town in the mountains, 3 syllables it hated more than it hated the dark, and it stopped pretending to be patient, and it began in earnest to claw its way back toward the light. Far above it, on the throne of fused black stone, the patient god heard the small thing stir and turned a fraction of his vast cold attention downward, and considered for the first time that the broken scrap of hatred screaming a single name in his lowest pit might be a tool worth the trouble of mending. Desaad, Darkseid said, the thing in the pit hates the new power. Hatred that specific is a kind of knowledge. Bring it to me. Let us see what it knows. Chapter 3 ends Chapter 4. Power and her girl. The woman who put Harry through the wall did not introduce herself first, which he would later decide was the single most honest thing anyone had done since he arrived. It happened in Metropolis 6 days after the Carpathians, in the lobby of a glass tower that belonged, a sign informed him, to Stairware Industries. He had come at Kara's suggestion to meet someone Kara described, with an expression Harry could not read, as complicated and family, sort of, and you should hear it from her and not from me, and also maybe don't lead with the wand. He had been admiring the lobby's truly excessive amount of marble when a blonde blur came through the mezzanine railing 40 feet up and hit him in the chest with the approximate force of a small artillery shell, and the two of them went through a wall and a second wall, and came to rest in what had until recently been a very nice conference room. Okay, Harry said from the floor with a woman's forearm across his throat and a great deal of pulverized drywall settling around them both. Hello, I'm getting a strong sense this is a greeting and not an assassination, because if you meant to kill me you'd have aimed for the throat instead of the sternum. So I'm going to lie here politely until you tell me what I've done. You showed up, the woman said. She was strong, genuinely strong, strong on the scale Kara was, and she was using it to pin him with an efficiency that suggested she had pinned a great many things. Her eyes were the same deliberate blue as Kara's, and her face had the same architecture, older and harder and set in an expression that had clearly decided about him in advance. Out of nowhere, through a sealed barrier glowing, and within a week you've got Diana touching your face and Kara holding your hand on the observation deck where she thinks nobody watches, and Clark giving you the handshake. And nobody ran a real check. Nobody asked the obvious question. So I'm asking it with my arm across your throat because that's the only way I've found to make powerful men answer honestly. She leaned in. Who sent you, and what does it cost us when the bill comes due? Nobody sent me, Harry said. And I've been asking myself the same thing about the bill, so we're on the same page there, even if your page involves more drywall than mine. He did not struggle. He had learned in a room full of people who could end his world that the way you got someone like this to lower their guard was not to give them a reason to keep it up. You're the complicated family Kara wouldn't describe. You've got her face, you hit harder than she does and you trust slower, let me guess. Another survivor of a dead world, except yours died differently and you spent your whole time here waiting for the catch. Because in your experience there's always a catch, and a stranger who fell out of the sky and immediately got everyone to love him is exactly the shape a catch comes in. The forearm did not move, but something flickered behind the deliberate blue eyes. You're going to want to be very careful, she said, about how accurately you keep doing that. It's not a trick, Harry said. It's just that I've met a lot of people who hit first and ask questions never. And almost all of them were protecting something they loved, and almost none of them were the villains everyone assumed they were. You came through a railing at 40 feet to interrogate a man you think is a threat to your family in a building you own where you could have just had security detain me. You didn't want me detained. You wanted to look me in the eye while you decided. That's not how a thug operates. That's how a guard does. He held her gaze level and unbothered. I'm Harry. You're going to be Kara's complicated family, which means your family I'd like very much not to start out by fighting. Karen, I'm guessing. Kara mentioned to Karen the way people mention a relative they love and find exhausting in roughly equal measure. The name landed. Karen Starr's forearm came off his throat, and she rocked back on her heels and stood and looked down at him with an expression that had revised itself into something warier and more interesting than the certainty she'd led with. Power girl when I'm working, she said. Karen when I'm not, and right now I'm extremely working. She did not offer him a hand up. He got up on his own, brushing drywall off his coat, and she watched him do it with frank assessment, the way Diana had assessed him but without Diana's 3,000 years of patience layered over the top. Karen's assessment was all surface and speed, blunt as a hammer and about as subtle, and Harry found to his own surprise that he liked it. You took a hit that would have leveled a building and you're worried about your coat, and you read me in about 9 seconds, which I hate. So let's skip the part where you charm me because I'm immune and get to the part where you tell me the truth, because Diana says you can't lie when you decide not to, and I want to see it. She did not have a lasso. She had something better from her point of view, which was a complete refusal to be managed. They talked in the wreckage of the conference room, because Karen saw no reason to relocate to somewhere undamaged when the damage was hers to bill, and she sat on the edge of a broken table with her arms crossed and made Harry stand and account for himself. And it was, he thought, the most refreshing conversation he'd had since the diner, precisely because she believed nothing he said until she'd kicked the tires on it. He told her the same truth he'd told Kara, and Karen interrupted him roughly twice a minute, not to be cruel but to test the joins the way an engineer wraps a weld. When he got to the part about the god measuring him, she stopped him entirely. Here's my problem with you, she said, and it's not that I think you're lying. Diana's right, you're not lying. You've got that look people get when they've decided lying is more trouble than it's worth. My problem is that you're too good a fit. A power that rivals Clark, a tragic backstory, a noble streak you can see from orbit, and a knack for saying the exact right thing to people who are lonely enough to want to hear it. Kara's lonely. Diana's lonely in that 1,000-year way she'd never admit to. And here you come, custom-built to be exactly what each of them needs, dropped on us by a beam of light from a dead empire, right before a god decides to invade. She leaned forward. You know what that looks like from where I sit? It looks like bait. Maybe not bait, you know you are, the best bait never knows. But I've been alive long enough across 2 universes to be suspicious of the perfect stranger who arrives precisely when the people I love are most ready to fall for him. And Harry, who had spent his life being told he was the chosen one, the destined boy, the perfect protagonist of someone else's prophecy, felt the truth of it land somewhere he had been carefully not looking. That, he said slowly, is the smartest thing anyone said to me since I got here, and I include the god and the 3,000-year-old in that. He pulled a broken chair upright and sat down across from her because the conversation had earned sitting. You're right that I'm a suspiciously good fit. I've been a suspiciously good fit my whole life, Karen. Where I'm from, there was a prophecy about me before I could walk. A dark wizard heard half of it and decided to murder a baby to get ahead of it, and the murder backfired and made me exactly the weapon the prophecy needed. My entire life has been other people's destiny wearing my face, so believe me, I have asked the question you're asking. Constantly. The light that moved me knew my name before I touched it. Something across the void noticed me the second I arrived. A piece of my old enemy might have come through with me. I would be a fool not to wonder whether I'm a piece on a board again, and I have spent my whole life being a piece on a board, and I am so tired of it that I crossed a universe partly to get away from it. Karen watched him, and the blunt certainty had gone quiet, replaced by something that was actually listening. So here's the thing I've decided, Harry went on, and it's the only answer I've got to your question, so I hope it's good enough. I might be bait, I might be a piece, I might be the most elaborate trap a god ever built, dressed up as a lonely man who says the right things. But the only way to be a trap is to do what the trapper wants, and the trapper wants me to be a weapon pointed at the people who are starting to trust me. So I'm not going to be that. Whatever I am, whatever I was sent here to be, I get to decide what I do with it, and I have decided. I'm going to stand between your family and the god. And if it turns out I was built to do the opposite, then the god built his weapon wrong because he built it out of a person, and a person can refuse. He spread his hands. That's it, that's all I've got. I can't prove I'm not bait. I can only promise you what I'll do when the hook gets pulled. And I'd rather you doubt me out loud like this to my face forever than trust me the easy way. The easy trust is how the traps actually work. Karen Starr looked at him for a long moment in the wreckage of her conference room, and then she did something Harry had not expected. She laughed, a short, surprised, genuine bark of it, and shook her head, and the wariness did not vanish, but it changed shape, settled from a guard's posture into something closer to a sparring stance, which from Karen was apparently a form of acceptance. Okay, she said. Okay, that's actually the right answer. The right answer was never going to be proof. The right answer was always going to be, I might be the trap and here's what I'll do about it, because that's the only answer that survives contact with reality. She stood and stretched, and the conference room creaked around her. I'm still going to watch you, closely. I'm going to be the one who never quite relaxes, and when the god finally pulls the hook, I'm going to be standing right there waiting to see which way you jump. She stuck out her hand, finally blunt and direct. You took the hit and worried about your coat, and you answered the hard question without flinching or charming, and Kara holds your hand where she thinks nobody's watching, and I would walk through a wall for Kara. So, not enemies, provisionally. Harry took the offered hand, and her grip was a test in itself, a slow increase of pressure that would have powdered the bones of anyone who couldn't match it. And he matched it easily, holding her strength against his own without strain, and he watched the exact moment Karen realized he wasn't bluffing about the scale of what he was. The moment recalculation flickered through the deliberate blue eyes. Huh, she said, you really are in Clark's weight class. Kara wasn't exaggerating. She let go. That's either the best news I've had all year or the worst, depending on which way you jump, and I genuinely can't tell yet. I hate that. I'm going to go fix this wall and stew about it. She did not get to fix the wall, because the wall was about to become the least of Metropolis's problems. Harry felt it before the alarms, a wrongness in the air he had learned to recognize over a town in the Carpathians, the smell of the world bending before a door fire opened. Karen felt at the same instant, her head snapping toward the shattered window in the city beyond. Boom tube, she said, big one, downtown, that's not a scout. She was already moving toward the broken window, and Harry was already beside her, and the easy provisional truce of 30 seconds ago had hardened into the simple shared language of two people who ran toward the thing everyone else ran from. Tell me you're as useful in a fight as you are annoying in a conversation. More, Harry said, and they went through the window together into a metropolis sky gone the wrong color. The tube had opened over the financial district, a circle of screaming geometry 100 feet across, and it was not disgorging parademons. It was disgorging something worse, something the hive sent when it wanted a place softened rather than scouted. A doomstone, Karen called it as they flew. A self-replicating engine of apocalyptic metal that fell from the tube and struck the plaza below, and immediately began to unfold, to build, to eat the pavement and the parked cars and the fleeing crowd's abandoned belongings and turn all of it into more of itself. A spreading cancer of black machinery that doubled and doubled again with every passing second. It eats matter and makes copies. Karen shouted over the rising scream of it. You can't punch it, punching it just gives it more surface to grow from. Clark learned that the hard way over Gotham. You have to get under it, find the seed, the original moat, and crush that, and it's somewhere in the middle of about 10 tons of self-assembling murder that doubles every 4 seconds. I've done this before. It is the worst. She dove toward the plaza, scattering crowds to safety with bursts of controlled flight, buying the fleeing people seconds. I'll keep it from spreading toward the people. You're the clever one, everybody keeps telling me, so be clever fast before this thing eats a city block and turns it into 1,000 more of itself. Harry dropped toward the growing horror and thought. He could not punch it, punching fed it. He could not burn it from outside, the heat would only be matter it could eat. He could not freeze the whole thing, it was already too large and growing too fast. The seed was buried in the center under tons of replicating metal, doubling every 4 seconds, and brute force was exactly the wrong tool, which meant brute force was exactly what it had been designed to defeat. It had been built by a patient god to beat the strong, so he would not be strong at it, he would be a wizard at it. Karen, he called, how much do you trust me for the next 10 seconds? Not even slightly. Perfect. Keep it off the people. I need 10 seconds and a clear line to the center. And Harry stopped trying to fight the doomstone on the outside and instead did the thing no apocalyptic engine had ever been built to anticipate, because no apocalyptic engine had ever fought a wizard. He cast, and the spell was not a blast or a shield, but the oldest tool of any curse breaker, a charm to find the heart of a thing. Point me turned inward and sharpened to a needle, and his vision cut through 10 tons of doubling black metal and found the seed, the single original mote pulsing at the center, the size of a marble, the source of all of it. And then, rather than dig to it through a substance that would eat his every effort, he reached for a spell he had used to retrieve 1,000 small lost objects in his life, the simplest summoning charm a first-year learns, and he aimed it not at the doomstone but threw it at the marble-sized seed alone. "A Kyo seed," Harry said, and put a star behind it. The summoning charm did not care about the 10 tons of metal in the way. It cared about the object named, and the object named was the seed, and the charm reached past the replicating mass and closed on the one mote that mattered and tore it free, ripping the original seed out through the body of its own creation and into Harry's open hand. And the instant the seed left the center, the whole spreading horror lost the thing that told it how to grow, and the doubling stopped. And 10 tons of self-assembling apocalyptic murder simply fell apart into inert black gravel that rained down over the plaza and lay still. Harry hung in the air over the suddenly silent plaza with a marble of pulsing black metal in his palm, and he closed his fist, and let the heat build behind his eyes and pour into his hand at point-blank range, until the seed that no force had been able to reach burned to nothing between his fingers. Then there was only the wind and the distant sirens and the gravel and Karen's star hanging 20 feet away with 1,000 people safe behind her and an expression on her face that had stopped being wary entirely. "You summoned it," she said. "You reached into a doomstone and just summoned the seed out like it was your keys." She flew closer, staring at him. "Clark spent a day and a half on the last one of those. You did it in 10 seconds with a magic word because you didn't try to be stronger than it, you tried to be cleverer than the guy who built it." She shook her head slowly. "Oh, that's a problem, that's a real problem, because I came here today fully intending to keep hating you on principle and you just made it so much harder." "I have that effect," Harry admitted. Diana said something similar. "I think it's becoming a theme." "Don't," Karen warned, pointing a finger at him as they descended together toward the gravel and the gathering emergency crews. "Don't you dare be charming about it. I will put you through another wall." But there was no heat in it now, only the wry blunt warmth of a person reorganizing an opinion she'd been quite attached to. And as they touched down in the wreckage of the plaza, she bumped his shoulder with hers, hard enough to stagger a tank, and Harry took it as the gesture of acceptance it was. And the third of the formidable women he had not been looking for had, without either of them quite meaning it to happen, stopped being a wall and started being a door. The cleanup took the rest of the afternoon, and Karen did not leave, and neither did Harry, and somewhere in the long, ordinary labor of it, the lifting of fallen masonry and the carrying of the trapped and the patient reassurance of people who had watched a building try to eat their street, the last of the wall Karen's star kept between herself and the world developed a crack she did not bother to patch. They worked well together. That was the thing that undid her, he suspected, more than any speech could have. He did not perform heroism for the cameras that had inevitably arrived. He found the woman pinned under the bus shelter before the cameras did and had her free and breathing before they thought to point a lens. And he did it quietly, and then he moved to the next thing without waiting to be thanked. And Karen, who had spent 2 universes being suspicious of men who needed to be seen being good, watched a man who plainly did not need it at all and felt her own carefully maintained cynicism develop a structural fault. When the worst of it was handled and the professionals had taken over the rest, the two of them ended up sitting on the edge of a half-collapsed parking structure with their feet hanging over the drop, gray with concrete dust, watching the sun go down red through the haze of a city that had survived another day it would never know how close it had come to not surviving. "You're not what I expected," Karen said. She'd stopped pretending it was an interrogation hours ago. "I had a whole speech. I'd been working on it since Kara first mentioned you. It was a good speech. Lots of pointed questions about motive and timing. And then you took the hit and worried about your coat, and you pulled a Doomstone's heart out like it was loose change, and you spent 4 hours pulling people out of rubble without once looking at a camera, and my speech just..." She made a small gesture, a building falling. "I hate when that happened. I've built a pretty good life on my speeches being right." "For what it's worth," Harry said, "your speech wasn't wrong. The timing is suspicious. I'm suspiciously convenient. You were right to come through that railing. I'd think less of you if you hadn't." He turned a chunk of broken concrete over in his dusty hands. "The thing nobody tells you about being suspicious for a living is how lonely it is. You're the one who never relaxes. You're the one standing at the back of the party watching the exits while everyone else has a nice time. I know that post. I stood it for years. It's the most necessary job in any group and the one that gets the least love, because the whole point of doing it well is that nothing happens, and people don't thank you for the nothing." Karen was quiet for a moment, and when she looked at him there was something in the blunt blue eyes that had not been there when she put him through a wall that morning. "How do you do that?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. Kara does it too, the bright thing, but with her it's that she genuinely likes everyone. You do something different. You look at a person for 9 seconds and you find the exact thing they've never told anybody and you just hand it back to them, gently, like it's nothing. She shook her head. It should feel like being read. It feels like being seen. I don't know how you make those different, and I don't trust things I don't understand, and I am sitting here covered in concrete dust deciding to be okay with not understanding it, which is not a thing I do. I had a lot of practice at being looked at and not seen, Harry said simply. It teaches you the difference from the wrong side. I spent my whole life as a story people told themselves. The chosen one, the symbol. Everyone had a Harry Potter in their head and almost none of them matched the one sitting in the room. So when I look at a person, I'm mostly just trying to do the thing I always wanted somebody to do for me. Look at the actual one, not the speech they came in with. He glanced at her. Your actual one is a person who's so tired of being braced for the catch that she's forgotten she's allowed to want things that aren't a trap. That's not a read, that's just recognition. It takes one to know one. Karen laughed, short and rough, and bumped his shoulder with hers, gentler than that morning, and did not move away afterwards, so that they sat with their shoulders touching and their feet over the drop and the red sun going down. Kara and Diana already got to you, she said. It wasn't an accusation. I can tell, the hand holding, the face touching. You've got that whole thing happening. And I came in here today fully prepared to be the adult in the room about it, the one who points out that this is insane and a man can't possibly mean it with 3 people at once and somebody's going to get hurt. She turned the chunk of concrete in her own dusty hands now, mirroring him without noticing. And the annoying thing, the really annoying thing, is that I sat here all afternoon watching you and I can't find the lie. I keep looking for the part where you're collecting us. There's no collection. You actually see each of us as a whole separate person, don't you? That's the part that makes it not gross. That's the part I can't argue with. I see you, Karen Starr, Harry said, and he said it plainly, the Amazon way, the way the women in his strange new life had taught him to say true things without burying them in charm. Not the speech. The guard who's tired of guarding. I'm not collecting you. I wouldn't know how. I just think you're magnificent in a completely different way than Diana's magnificent or Kara's magnificent, and I'm not going to pretend I don't think it to keep things tidy, because I've spent my whole life keeping things tidy and alone, and I'm finished with that. You can put me through another wall if you'd like, but that's the truth, and you wanted the truth. For a long moment Karen Starr said nothing at all. Then she set down the chunk of concrete, very deliberately, and she reached over and took his dusty face in one strong hand and turned it toward her and kissed him, hard and brief and curt. The kiss of a woman who had decided something and saw no reason to be gradual about it. And when she pulled back she was almost smiling, the wry blunt warmth winning out at last over 2 universes of bracing for the catch. For the record, she said, I still reserve the right to put you through a wall. And if you ever make me regret this, I will, but... She stood and pulled him up after her, and her grip was a test that he passed simply by being there. The catch turned out to be the lonely strong people finding each other. I said it might be, I just didn't think I'd be one of them. She brushed concrete dust off his shoulder, an oddly tender gesture from a woman who'd thrown him through 2 walls. Come on, Kara texted. There's takeout and a roof, and apparently we're all going to talk about this like adults, which I'm dreading, because being an adult about feelings is the one fight I always lose. And they flew up together into the red evening, the guard and the one who had spent his life being looked at and not seen, and the wall between Karen Starr and the world stayed exactly where it had cracked, which was to say, open. They ended up on the roof of Stairway that evening, all 4 of them, because Karen had declared that she was not flying up to the station to debrief when she had a perfectly good penthouse with a stock bar and a view. And Diana had agreed with the particular swiftness of a woman who had spent 3,000 years learning that some counsels go better with wine. And Kara had arrived with takeout for people who didn't strictly need to eat and ate anyway, because it was one of Earth's better ideas. Harry sat on the parapet with the city glittering below and watched the 3 of them and understood that he was, in some quiet and irreversible way, in the middle of something he did not have a word for and did not want to wreck by reaching for the wrong one. Karen, predictably, reached for it first. Okay, I'm going to say the thing, she announced, dropping into a deck chair with a glass of something amber, because somebody has to, and Diana's too dignified and Kara's too nice and Harry's too busy being mysteriously fine with everything. So, she pointed at Harry with the glass. You've been on this planet for less than 2 weeks, and in that time you have managed to get the 3 of us. 3 women who do not, as a rule, share well, sitting on a roof, not killing each other over you. Kara held your hand. Diana touched your face, which I have known Diana for years, and I have never once seen Diana initiate. And I came at you through a railing today fully intending to follow you under threat, and instead I'm drinking on my own roof while you make eyes at the skyline. I'm not blind. None of us are blind, so are we going to talk about it like adults, or are we going to do the human thing where everyone pretends and it all explodes in 6 months? There was a silence. Kara looked at Diana. Diana looked with the unhurried gravity she brought to everything at Harry. The Amazons, Diana said at last, did not invent jealousy. We had no men to be jealous over for most of our history, and when the world finally forced the question on us, we found we had built our hearts on a different floor plan than the one the outside world insists upon. I told Harry on the station that I have outlived everyone I permitted myself to want. I did not say the rest of it, which is that the grief taught me something the long-lived learn and the short-lived rarely do. A heart is not a debt that one person pays in full. It is a fire. It does not go out because it warms more than one hearth. She turned her glass slowly. I have watched Kara hold his hand. It did not diminish what I feel. It is not in me to want him to be less so that I might own more of him. That is not love. That is bookkeeping. That's basically what I told him on the station, Kara said, drawing her knees up, bright and unembarrassed. My world's gone, but that's one of the things I kept. A heart isn't a territory. It doesn't get smaller when it's shared. She looked at Karen, and there was real affection in it, the exasperated affection of family. I knew you'd be the one to say it out loud. You always say the thing. It's the most annoying and the best thing about you. Karen drained half her glass and looked, for once, slightly off balance, which Harry suspected was a rare condition for her. Right, well, I was expecting more of a fight, frankly, and now I feel like I walked into a room swinging at a door that was already open. She rallied. Fine, for the record, I'm not committing to anything. I put him through 2 walls this morning, and I reserve the right to do it again. But I'm also not going to be the one who blows up something the 3 of you have apparently already made your peace with, because I've spent 2 universes being the one who's always braced for the catch, and I am frankly exhausted, and if the catch turns out to be the lonely strong people found each other, then that's the best catch I've ever heard of. She pointed the glass at Harry again. But you don't get to coast on this. 3 of us is not 3 times easier than 1. It's 3 times the ways to let someone down. You understand that? I understand that better than you might think, Harry said, and he meant it, and they could all hear that he meant it. Where I'm from, people would call what's happening on this roof a great many ugly words, almost all of them invented by people who never managed to love anyone properly even once. So I'm not going to pretend it's simple, or that I won't get it wrong, or that I deserve it by default. I don't. Nobody deserves people like you 3 by default. He looked at each of them in turn, Kara's brightness and Diana's gravity and Karen's blunt, wary warmth, and felt the enormity of it. 3 women who fought gods and had every reason to guard their hearts and had each, in their own way, decided to risk him. What I can promise is that I'll do the work, all of it. The honest conversations, the hard ones, the ones where I've hurt one of you without meaning to and have to sit in it. I've spent my whole life being told I was special and being kept at arm's length anyway. I would rather do the difficult thing with people who don't keep me at arm's length than the easy thing alone. I've had the easy thing alone. It nearly killed me. Diana raised her glass, the firelight of the city in it. Then we are agreed, she said, that nothing about this will be easy and that we will do it anyway with open eyes. She looked at the other 2. It is, I think, the most Amazonian sentiment I have heard a man express. Drink to it or don't, but the offer stands. And they drank to it, the 4 of them on a rooftop above a city that had nearly been eaten that morning. And for one more evening the war and the god felt like things happening on the far side of a window. And Harry Potter, who had crossed a universe braced for the floor to drop, let himself believe, just for the length of one shared bottle of wine, that he had found the thing he had stopped letting himself hope for. The floor, of course, was going to drop. But the floor was patient, and the floor was a god, and the god was, that very evening, putting the last pieces of his lever into place. Far away, in a sky the color of a banked forge, the thing that had been Lord Voldemort was being given back its hands. Desaad had brought the screaming splinter up out of the lowest pit, and Darkseid had looked at it with the fraction of attention he allotted to tools, and had judged it worth mending, and so the engines of apocalypse had been turned for a little while, to the strange and delicate work of rebuilding a soul that had organized its entire existence around the refusal to die. They fed it. They gave it the harvested life of the vanished freighter crews and the silent Arctic station, the raw material of the slowly emptied towns, and the splinter drank it all and grew, and remembered, and reassembled itself piece by stolen piece into something that walked upright again and wore a face. A pale, ruined approximation of the face it had worn in life, the snake-flat features and the red and lidless eyes that had haunted a boy's nightmares across an entire other universe. You hate the new power, Darkseid said from the throne when the thing was whole enough to kneel. You hate it on a scale I find informative. Tell me its name. Potter, the word came out of the reconstituted Voldemort like a wound reopening, and around it the red air of apocalypse seemed to curdle. Harry Potter, he unmade me. Twice he should have died and twice he did not, and the second time he took everything from me, my body, my followers, the immortality I bled my own soul apart to secure. I have spent the years since as less than a ghost, a scrap snagged in the dark, and the only thing that kept the scrap from dissolving was the hatred. The hatred has a shape, great one, the shape is his throat under my hand. The red eyes lifted. Give me back enough of myself to close that hand, and I will tell you everything I know of how he can be killed. And there is much. I studied him for 17 years. I know the door he came through. I know that his power is new to him, that he has held it for weeks and not centuries, that he does not yet know its floor or its ceiling. And I know the one thing your scouts have already begun to learn for themselves. A slow, terrible smile. I know that he can be made to break by being made to watch. Darkseid was silent for a long moment, the silence of geology, of a being weighing a tool against the work it was meant for. My scouts reported, Darkseid said, that the new power empties a town before it fights and announces that suffering does not make it reckless but makes it arrive. It believes this is its strength. You believe it is its weakness. You cannot both be correct. We are both correct, Voldemort said, and there was an awful relish in it, the connoisseur's relish of a creature that had spent a lifetime studying exactly this. That is the elegance of it. He will always arrive. He cannot not arrive. It is built into him the way obedience is built into your winged things. So you do not bait him with one town and hope he is reckless. You bait him with everything he loves all at once, in places he cannot reach simultaneously, and you make him choose. You make him stand in the exact center of every person he has decided to protect and feel, for the first time, that arriving is not enough, that his power has a floor after all, and the floor is this. He is one being and love is many, and you can always threaten more of it than one being can hold. The red eyes gleamed. I could not beat him when he had one war and one prophecy and a handful of friends, but he has grown greedy, great one. In 2 weeks he has acquired 3 women who fight gods and a planet full of people who have started to look up at him with hope. He has given himself so very much to lose. And a man with that much to lose is a man you can crucify on his own heart. And on the throne of fused black stone, Darkseid, who did not smile, who had no use for the expression, nonetheless went very still in the way that those who served him had learned to fear more than any rage, because it meant that the patient god had heard in the ravings of a broken thing from another universe the exact shape of a key. You will have your hands, Darkseid said. You will have more than your hands. You will have a measure of the apocalyptian fire, and you will lead the first wave, and you will teach the new power that its strength is a leash. And while it learns this lesson, while it flies in 3 directions at once trying to hold what cannot be held, I will complete the equation and I will speak it into a world too distracted by its grief to cover its ears. He leaned forward a fraction and the firelight moved across the ancient stone of his face. Do not mistake this for partnership, little ghost. You are a knife I have found in the dirt of a conquered place. I will use you until you are dull, and then I will leave you where I find the next one, but while you are sharp. The vast cold eyes regarded the kneeling thing. While you are sharp, you may cut the one who unmade you. Consider it a kindness. I am rarely kind. Voldemort bowed his ruined head and did not care that he was a knife, because a knife was all he had ever wanted to be, and the hand that held him was pointed at the one throat in all of creation he had crossed death itself to reach. Harry Potter, he said again, savoring it, the way a man savors water after a long thirst. I am coming for everything you have learned to love, and this time you have so very much more to lose. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Lord of Apocalypse takes notice. The attack came at dawn on 4 fronts at once, and it was designed by someone who had studied Harry Potter for 17 years and understood that the cruelest thing you could do to a man who would always arrive was to make arriving impossible. Harry was on the station when the alarms began, and they did not stop, layering one over another until the briefing room was a wall of red, and Superman was there in an instant and Diana a breath behind him, and the displays threw the catastrophe around them in light. 4 boom tubes opened simultaneously on 4 points of the globe, and not one of them random. Metropolis, Superman read off, his voice gone flat and fast. The Messira's harbor. The Carpathian town. And a pause and something in his face Harry had not seen there before. Coordinates that resolved to a hospital in Gotham, a children's hospital. He chose them, Harry said, and the understanding arrived whole and cold. Look at the list. Metropolis is Kara's and Karen's. The harbor is Diana's home. The town is the place I chose people over kill, the place I made my whole speech about always arriving. And the children's hospital is. He did not finish it. He did not need to. It's the place that has nothing to do with any of us except that it's full of the most defenseless people on the planet. And he knows I can't not go, and he knows I can only be in one place at a time. This isn't an invasion. It's a question with 4 answers, and he's betting I can only give one. Then he has misunderstood us, Diana said, and there was something terrible and bright in her voice. the voice of a woman who had defended a harbor for 3,000 years. He has built his trap for one being. He has forgotten that the one being is no longer alone. And that, Harry would think later, was the moment the whole shape of the war turned, the moment the lever the patient god had machined so carefully snapped in his hand, because Voldemort had told Darkseid the truth about the old Harry Potter and a lie about the new one. The old Harry had been one boy and one prophecy, and a handful of friends he was always trying to protect by doing everything himself. The new Harry had spent 2 weeks learning a different lesson on a rooftop and an observation deck and the edge of a parking structure. That the answer to love is many was not a weakness to be exploited but a strength to be deployed, because he was not the only one who would arrive. 4 fronts, Harry said, and he was already moving and the others moved with him. 4 of us near enough. Superman, the children's hospital, it's in your city's reach and you're the fastest of us and that's the one where speed saves the most lives. Diana, your harbor, nobody defends the Messira like you and I won't insult you by suggesting otherwise. I'll take the Carpathian town because it's mine, because he made it mine, and because whatever he's sending there is meant for me and I'd rather it find me than the people, which leaves Metropolis. He keyed the channel. Karen, you're already home, it's yours. Kara's voice came back instant and fierce. Already flying. Karen's 2 blocks ahead of me and swearing. We've got Metropolis, go be clever somewhere else. Go, Superman said and was gone. Harry, Diana caught his arm at the airlock one moment, the gravity of her undimmed by the alarms. The town is the trap, you know this. The other 3 are real, but the town is where he will be because the town is the one he made personal, and a thing made personal is a thing made for an ambush. Whatever waits for you, there waits for you specifically. Her hand tightened. Be the man who changes the rules, not the man who walks into the fight they built. I'm always the man who changes the rules, Harry said, and for one breath he let himself lean his forehead against hers as he had with Kara over the bay. An Amazon farewell with an Amazon's wait. Defend your harbor, Diana, I'll see you on the other side of this. You will, she said, fierce, a vow rather than a hope, and then they were both falling toward the turning earth, 4 lights scattering to 4 corners of a world to answer a question a god had thought had only one answer. The Carpathian town was burning when Harry came down out of the dawn, and the thing waiting for him in its square was wearing a face he had watched die. It was Voldemort, and it was not. The face was the snake-flat ruin he remembered, the red eyes, the absence where a nose should be, but the thing wore it like a costume stretched over something larger, and the something larger was fire, apocalyptic fire, a corona of it burning along his reconstituted limbs, the dull industrial orange of a world that ran on cruelty. He stood in the center of the burning square with the townspeople fled into the hills behind him, exactly the audience he had arranged, and he turned his ruined face up to the falling light of the one he hated and he smiled. And the smile was the worst thing Harry had seen since he arrived in this universe, because it was a smile of pure completion, a creature that had crossed death and a universe and the inside of a god's foundry for this single moment. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, and his voice was the old voice threaded with new fire, the high, cold sibilance Harry had heard in his nightmares for half his life. You felt it, didn't you, when you crossed over? You felt me come with you. A piece of me snagged in the dark, riding the same light. You have spent 2 weeks pretending I was a leftover, a ghost, something you had already finished. The fire flared along his arms. I am not finished, I am improved. The thing that rules this place looked into the lowest pit of his world of wonders and found me screaming your name, and he judged me worth the mending, and he gave me back my hands and filled them with the fire of a god. So here we are again, you and I, in a town full of frightened people, exactly where we always end. And this time I have been given everything I lacked. I have been given an army at my back and a god above me, and you, the red eyes gleamed. You have been given so very much to lose. You've been given a leash, Harry said. He came to rest on the cobbles of the square unhurried, and he did not draw the wand, and the calm of him was not performance, because he had learned the difference between brave and clear in a town very like this one, and he intended to be clear. I know how this works, Tom. I knew how it worked when I was 17. A man comes to you offering power and you take it, because you've never once in your existence understood that power offered is power owned, that the hand that fills your hands can empty them again whenever it likes. Darkseid didn't mend you because he respects you. He mended you because you hate me in a useful direction. You're a knife he found in the dirt. He told you so himself, didn't he? I can see it on you. He told you exactly what you are and you knelt anyway, because being a knife pointed at my throat is the only ambition you've ever had that survived dying. The fire along Voldemort's arms flared white, and the smile curdled, and Harry knew he'd struck the joint, the same joint that had always been there, the vanity that could not bear to be small. You think you have grown wise, Voldemort hissed. You think your 2 weeks of borrowed starlight and your 3 borrowed women have made you something other than the boy who survived me by luck and by his mother's sentiment. Let me show you what I have learned in the foundries of a god, Harry Potter. Let me show you the lesson the patient one taught me, the lesson you are about to learn in 4 places at once. He raised his burning hands. You will always arrive. It is the truest thing about you. So I have arranged for you to arrive here with me, while in 3 other places the people you have decided to love discover the precise limit of what one man can hold. You cannot be in Metropolis. You cannot be in the harbor. You cannot be in the hospital. You can only be here with me, learning that your arriving was never enough, that it was only ever the bait in your own trap. The fire roared. I do not need to beat you. I only need to keep you here in this square while you feel them fall. And he came, all fire and stolen power and 17 years of cultivated hate, and Harry Potter met him in the burning square, and the cobbles cracked beneath them, and the war for the world began in earnest. It was, Harry would reflect afterward, the strangest fight of his life, because for the first time he was not afraid of losing it. He had been terrified of Voldemort once. He had been a child, hunted, outmatched, surviving on luck and love and the slow accumulation of impossible help. The thing he fought in the burning square was stronger than that Voldemort had ever been, wrapped in the fire of a god, fast and vicious and lethal, and a single one of those burning blows would have ended the boy Harry had been. But Harry was not that boy, and the fire that could have unmade him broke against his skin like the hawk's talons had broken on the moor, and the high cold curses that had haunted his nightmares splashed across a body that ran on starlight and did not catch. So he let Voldemort hit him. That was the clever thing, the rule-changing thing, the thing Diana had told him to be. He stood in the square and let the resurrected Dark Lord pour the fire of apocalypse into him, blow after blow, and he did not fall and he did not burn, and he watched the dawning horror in the red eyes as Voldemort understood that the lesson he had come to teach was being taught back to him. That there was a being in the world now against whom his entire arsenal, the fire and the curses and the 17 years of study, simply did not function. You should have asked the god, Harry said, catching a fist of apocalyptian fire in his bare hand and holding Voldemort by the burning wrist while the flames guttered against a palm they could not mark. What happened to his last scout? I bound it and sent it home. You're stronger than the scout. You're also slower because you're carrying 17 years of needing this to mean something, and need makes you predictable, and predictable is dead. He leaned in, and his voice was almost gentle. The gentleness he'd learned was crueler to a creature like this than any shout. You told Darkseid I have so much to lose now. You're right, I do. But here's the part your 17 years of studying me never understood. The part you got wrong when I was 17 and you've got wrong again now. The people I love aren't a weakness you found. They're not bait in my trap. They're the reason the trap doesn't work. He tightened his grip and the fire died. Because I'm not defending 4 fronts alone, Tom. I never was. You built a question with 4 answers and you assumed I was the only one who could answer it. You forgot to ask whether the man who refused to be alone anymore might have stopped being alone. And across the world, in 3 other places, the answer Voldemort had not accounted for was being delivered. In Metropolis, Kara Zor-El and Karen Star turned a wave of parademons back into the burning door they'd come through, the 2 of them moving like a single furious organism, bright and brutal. A city's worth of people pulled out from under falling fire by 2 women who had each, separately, decided long ago that this city was theirs to keep. In the harbor of Themyscira, Diana stood on the seawall where she had stood for 3,000 years and met the apocalyptian assault with a sister army at her back and a song of war in her throat, and the invaders learned what every invader of that harbor had ever learned. And over a children's hospital in Gotham, a man in blue moved faster than fire, faster than fear, evacuating an entire ward in the time it took the boom tube to finish opening, so that when the horror came through it found nothing to harvest but an empty building and the fist of the fastest man alive. 4 fronts, 4 answers. And the god who had built the question for one being watched, through 10,000 eyes, as the one being turned out to be 4, turned out to be a harbor and a city and a fast man and a town, turned out to have done the one thing the anti-life equation was built to prove impossible, which was to multiply a single will into many freely chosen others and lose nothing in the sharing. In the burning square, Voldemort screamed, and it was the scream of a knife that has discovered it is being broken against the very throat it was forged to cut. You will not win, he spat, wrenching backward, the fire guttering and flaring along his ruined frame as he gathered himself for something larger. Do you understand what is happening while you stand here being clever at me? I am the first wave, Potter. I am the distraction's distraction. While the world celebrates turning back 4 doors, the patient one finishes his equation, and when it is spoken, your harbor and your city and your fast man and your love that is many will all hear it at once. And they will set down their weapons and kneel, every mind on every world, and your arriving will not save them because there will be nothing left inside them to save. The red eyes blazed. I do not have to beat you, I only have to keep you busy, and I have. Harry went still. Because that, he understood with the cold clarity the war had given him, was the first true thing the creature had said. The 4 fronts had never been the attack, the 4 fronts had been the noise. And while 4 heroes had scattered to 4 corners of the world to be triumphant, the patient god at the center of it had been given exactly what he'd wanted, which was the world's whole attention pointed in 4 wrong directions, and time and quiet to finish the one machine that could not be refused. Where, Harry said, and the gentleness was gone now, all of it, is he speaking it from? And Voldemort, who had spent 17 years learning that the cruelest blow you could land on Harry Potter was always the one that came wrapped in his own helplessness, laughed through the fire and gave him the answer because the answer was itself the trap. Everywhere, he said, all at once, he does not need a mouth Potter, he needs only a world distracted enough to stop covering its ears. And you have given him that, you and your scattered, triumphant, freely chosen many, you won all 4 fronts. The smile was completion itself, the Foundry's final product. And in winning them, you lost the war because you were never meant to lose the fronts. You were meant to be winning them loudly, gloriously, while the god finished his sum. Pull back then from the burning square, up through the smoke and the cold dawn air, until the whole turning world hangs below like a thing held in the palm, and see what the patient god saw through his 10,000 eyes that morning, and understand why he believed for a little while that he had already won. See the harbor of the Messira, where the sea itself had been made a weapon, the apocalyptian landing craft grinding onto a beach that 3,000 years of Amazons had consecrated to exactly this, and Diana at the center of it like the apex of a spear, her sisters a bronze tied behind her, the last a wheel of light in her hand cutting the legs from war things that had conquered 100 worlds and had never once made landfall on hers. See her sing as she fought, the old war songs in a tongue older than the cities of men, and see the invaders falter not from the blades, though the blades were terrible, but from the sound of a people who had decided before history began that this beach would never fall and had simply never been given a reason to revise the decision. See Metropolis, where 2 women who wore almost the same face turned a sky full of fire back upon itself. See Kara Zor-El move through the falling parademons like a verb, like the act of saving made flesh, pulling a falling crane off a schoolyard with one hand and a family off a burning rooftop with the other, bright and furious and grieving. Because every parademon she struck down had once been a person on some conquered world, and she knew it and struck them down anyway and wept for them anyway, which was the whole of who she was, compressed into a single morning of war. See Power Girl beside her, blunt as a falling mountain, unsubtle as an avalanche, planting herself in the mouth of the boom tube itself so that nothing more could come through, holding a door meant to disgorge an army shut with the flat of her 2 hands and her 2 heels dug into the buckling street, swearing the entire time, magnificent. See Gotham and the empty children's ward, and the fastest man alive standing in the center of it with nothing left to save, because he had already saved it all, faster than the door could open, faster than the harvest could begin. And see the frustration on the face of the harvest when it came through into a building swept clean. An entire apocalyptic incursion arriving to find a single blue figure waiting in an empty room with his arms folded and his patience, for once a match for a god's. 4 fronts blazing, glorious, one and being one, exactly as the patient god had arranged. And beneath the glory, threading up through the streets of every city on the turning world, the thing that the glory had been built to conceal. See the undefended kneel. It began with the ones who had the least to refuse it with, which was the particular cruelty of it, that the equation took first the exhausted and the grieving and the already half-convinced, the ones who had been told their whole lives that they did not matter and now heard in their own voices in a logic they could not answer, the patient gray case for believing it at last. See a woman set down the groceries she was carrying and sit on the curb and go still. See a man stop his car in the middle of a bridge and rest his hands in his lap. See the great human noise of a planet, the billion arguments and prayers and bargains and hopes, begin to thin here and there at first and then in widening gray patches, as mind after undefended mind heard the unfinished sentence reaching out and found, inside itself, no reason the sentence had left it to keep going. And see, past the moon, past the charted dark, on the throne of fused black stone in the sky the color of a banked forge, the source of it. See Darkseid speak without speaking, the anti-life equation assembling syllable by impossible syllable behind the ancient ruin of his face, each term of it a thing that had taken eternities to derive, the proof that struggle is arithmetic and the arithmetic is solved, the longest and coldest sentence ever composed in any reality, nearing at last, after epochs of patience, its terrible final clause. He did not hurry. He had never once hurried. He felt the 4 fronts blaze and judged them noise, felt the undefended kneel and judged it progress, felt somewhere one mind in a burning square refuse him and judged it, for the moment beneath his notice, a single candle in a world he was methodically darkening. He was the most patient being in creation, and he was winning, and he knew it, and the knowing was the closest thing to joy his vast cold architecture could produce. He had modeled every power in the universe. He had spent eternity learning the exact shape of strength and speed and energy and will, and against each shape he had built eventually a counter, and there was nothing left in all of creation that could surprise him, because surprise is the privilege of the ignorant, and Darkseid had spent forever becoming the opposite of ignorant. There was only one thing he had never had to learn, because in all his eternity of conquest, it had never once existed in any world he had touched. He had never had to learn magic. He did not know the word. He had no model for a power that did not push or pull or burn or break, but simply changed the rule underneath the pushing. The rule he had assumed with eternal and unexamined certainty was the one thing that could not be changed. And so the patient god spoke his unspeakable sum toward its final clause, certain of his victory, blind in the one direction no enemy had ever come from, while across the void a door he had not opened began very quietly to tear itself into being in the heart of his own war world, and through it toward him came the variable he had never learned to model, and the 4 bright answers to a question he had already forgotten he had asked. Harry did not waste the moment on Voldemort. That was the second rule-changing thing, and it cost the resurrected Dark Lord more than any blow could have, because Voldemort had arranged the entire square as a theater for his own importance, and Harry simply declined to attend. "You kept me busy," Harry said. "Noted, you're a distraction. Distractions get set aside." And he did not kill the creature, though a part of him that had been 17 and hunted wanted to. He bound it instead, the same cocoon of conjured force that had held the scout, layered now with every binding charm he knew and a star's worth of will to seal them, and he left Voldemort screaming and immobile in the burning square, a knife pinned to a board, and he went up into the dawn faster than the creature's curses could follow. Because the creature had finally told him the one thing that mattered, and the telling had ended the creature's usefulness to anyone, even the god who held its leash. He felt the equation as he climbed. It was not a sound. Superman had warned him it would not be a sound, and the warning had not prepared him, because the thing arrived inside the skull rather than through the ear, a cold gray certainty seeping up from underneath thought itself, patient and total and almost kind. It did not shout. It reasoned. It laid out in a logic that wore the shape of his own inner voice, the complete and unanswerable case for setting everything down. That struggle was arithmetic, and the arithmetic had been solved. That every choice he had ever made had been the deterministic output of causes he did not control. That the love he had crossed a universe to find was only chemistry mistaking itself for meaning. That the kindest thing, the truest thing, the thing a clear-eyed person would do, was to stop, to kneel, to let the gray certainty in, and rest at last from the exhausting illusion of mattering. It was, Harry understood dimly, fighting to keep his altitude as the gray rose, the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered, more dangerous than the god, because the god was outside him and this was inside, this was wearing his own voice. This was the anti-life equation reaching into the one place he had always been alone and offering with perfect logic to end the loneliness by ending the self that felt it. And Harry Potter, who had walked into a forest at 17 to die because he had decided freely that the lives of others were worth his own, met the perfect logic of anti-life with the one thing it could not solve, which was a choice that did not need to be reasonable. No, he thought into the gray. And it was not an argument because the equation won all arguments. It was simply a refusal, the same refusal his mother had made in front of a crib, the same refusal he had made in a forest, the bare ungovernable fact of a will that declined to be proven away. I choose them. I know it's chemistry. I know I didn't pick the causes. I'm choosing anyway. That's the whole trick. That was always the whole trick. You can prove I have no choice all you like. I'm going to keep choosing while you prove it. The gray recoiled, not far, not for long. But it recoiled the way the curse had recoiled in the vault. The way Voldemort had always recoiled from the one thing he could not model. And in the space the recoil opened, Harry got his altitude back and his self back and the cold, clear knowledge of what had to happen next. The equation was not finished. That was the thing the recoil told him. If it had been finished, complete, spoken whole into a distracted world, he would not have been able to refuse it. Nobody would. That was the entire point of it. What he had felt was the first draft, the equation reaching out to test its grip while Darkseid spoke it into being syllable by patient syllable. And it had found in Harry a mind it could not close, and the failure to close that one mind had bought the world a little time and bought Harry the one piece of intelligence the whole war turned on. It could be refused while it was being spoken. It could not be refused once it was complete. Which meant the war had a clock now, and the clock was the length of time it took a god to finish a sentence that had no natural end, and the only way to stop the sentence was to reach the mouth that was speaking it, on a world that was a wound, behind a door that opened only one way. He keyed the channel as he flew and found the others already on it, their voices threaded with the same gray strain, 4 people each fighting the same cold logic in the privacy of their own skulls, and each, he heard, refusing it because they were the kind of people who refused things, because that was why the light had gathered them. "Tell me you all felt that," Harry said. "Tell me you're all still you." "Still me," Kara said, fierce through the strain. "It's the worst thing I've ever felt, and I turned a boom tube inside out about 90 seconds ago, so that's saying something. Metropolis is holding. The people, Harry, the ones who heard it longer than we did, some of them are, they're kneeling, in the streets. It's not finished, but it's reaching, and the ones without something to refuse it with are. The Messiah holds," Diana said, and her voice was iron over the gray. "My sisters are trained against compulsion older than this, but Kara is right. Across the world, the undefended are going down. We do not have the days this would take by any ordinary measure. We have hours, perhaps less. Gotham Ward's empty and safe, and I'm watching half a city kneel in the streets, and I cannot do one single thing about it from here," Superman said, and the helplessness in the voice of the strongest man alive was its own kind of alarm. "It's not coming from anywhere on Earth. I've been listening at every frequency there is. It's coming from him, from the source, from Apocalypse." "Then that's where we go," Harry said. "All of it, now. We stop trying to defend a world that's being switched off one mind at a time, and we go put our hands around the mouth that's doing the switching. Superman, can you open a door to Apocalypse, a boom tube of our own?" A pause, heavy with the cost of what was being asked. "I can. I have the means. I've used it once. It's a one-way trip into the worst place in the universe, into the throne room of a god against his entire war world, with no guarantee any of us come back. You understand what you're asking?" "I understand exactly what I'm asking," Harry said. "I'm asking the 5 of us to go to the center of the thing and end it, because the alternative is watching everyone we've ever loved kneel in the street and not get up. I'm asking because it's the only door left. And I'm asking because I'd rather take the worst place in the universe with the 4 of you beside me than defend the best one alone." He let a breath of frost fall from his lips into the dawn. "Regroup at the station. 1 hour, we rest because we're no good to anyone burned out, and we plan because walking into a god's house without a plan is how the brave get everyone killed. 1 hour, then we open the door." They took the hour. It was Diana who insisted on it, Diana who understood, out of 3,000 years, that an army which does not rest before the last battle is an army that loses it, and so they did not spend the hour at the war table. They spent it being people, because people was the thing they were about to risk everything to remain. The station had quarters that Harry had not had occasion to use, and it was there, in the quiet of the hour the world had been given by his refusal, that the thing which had been building since a rooftop and an observation deck and the edge of a parking structure finally arrived. The way weather arrives, the way the inevitable arrives when it has been postponed exactly as long as it can bear to be. He would not have reached for it himself. On the eve of a battle, none of them might survive. It was Kara who came first, because Kara had always been the brave one about the heart. Kara who took his face in her hands in the dim quiet and said, "We might not come back, and I am not going into the worst place in the universe having been careful with you. I've been careful my whole life. I'm done being careful," and kissed him, and there was nothing careful in it at all. And Diana came, who had outlived everyone she had ever permitted herself to want, and had decided, on a station hung between the earth and its moon, that she would permit herself this one, with open eyes, knowing the cost, because 3,000 years had taught her that the things you do not reach for are the only things you truly lose. And Karen came, blunt and certain and finally unguarded, the wall she kept between herself and the world left exactly where it had cracked, because the catch had turned out to be the lonely strong people finding each other, and she had decided to stop bracing against the best thing that had ever happened to her. What passed between the 4 of them in that quiet hour was theirs, and the door closed on it, and the universe was not invited. It is enough to say that Harry Potter, who had crossed an entire reality, braced for the floor to drop and the loneliness to close back over him like water, spent the hour before the worst battle of his life not alone, and was held in return by 3 women who had each freely chosen him and freely chosen in their different and unbookkept ways to share him, and that when the hour ended and the alarm called them gently back to the war, he rose from it remade a second time. Not by a star this time, but by the simple, impossible fact of being wanted without being made smaller for it. "For the record," Karen murmured in the last quiet moment before they armored themselves back into the people who fought gods, "if you die in there, I'm going to be furious. I just decided to stop bracing for the catch. You don't get to be the catch. That would be the worst possible timing, and I would never forgive you." "Everything's always the worst possible timing," Harry said, and pulled her in Kara and reached for Diana's hand. "I told Kara that 2 weeks ago. You might as well fall for someone in the middle of the fire. The fire's the part you can count on. He looked at the three of them, the brightness and the gravity and the blunt warmth, the whole improbable shape of the life he had found on the far side of a door he hadn't known was a door. I'm not planning to die in there. I'm planning to walk into a God's house and take his sentence out of his mouth and walk back out with all four of you. I've spent my whole life doing impossible things alone. I'd like to try doing one impossible thing with everything I have to lose standing beside me. Turns out it's harder to lose 4 fronts when you've got 4 people who'll each hold one. They armored back into themselves, and they gathered at the war table, and Harry laid out the plan, and the plan was clever in the particular way the war had taught him to be clever, which was to find the rule everyone assumed was fixed and break it first. Here's what he expects, Harry said, the displays throwing apocalypse around them in light, a planet of fire pits and foundries and a single black throne at the center of it all. He expects us to come the way heroes always come. Loud, direct. 5 lights falling on his throne room, all our power pointed at the front door. Exactly the kind of glorious frontal assault his entire war world is built to grind down. He spent eternity learning to beat the strong, and a frontal assault is the strong doing the one thing the strong always do. He'll have 10,000 parademons in the fire of a foundry and all the time in the world, because every second we spend fighting through his army is a second he spends finishing his sentence. He let that sit. So we don't do that. We don't fight through to the mouth. We take the mouth out of the equation while the army's still looking at the front door. How? Superman said. He doesn't have a mouth, you heard the creature. He's speaking it into existence without speaking. It's coming from him, from his whole being. You can't gag a god. You can't gag him, Harry agreed. But you don't have to gag the mouth. You have to break the speaker's concentration. The equation isn't finished. It's being spoken syllable by syllable, and it failed to close my mind, which means it's fragile while it's incomplete, which means it depends on him holding the whole impossible sum in his attention without a single break. He is the most patient being in creation. His entire power is that nothing can hurry him, nothing can rattle him, nothing in eternity has ever successfully broken his concentration. Harry looked around the table. So that's the rule we break. We don't outfight him, we make him flinch. One flinch, 1/2 second, where the patient god is forced to think about something other than his sentence. And the incomplete equation collapses, because an unfinished proof that loses its prover's attention isn't a weapon. It's just gray noise that everyone who's still themselves can refuse. And how, Diana said slowly, the strategist in her leaning forward, do you make Darkseid flinch? Beings far stronger than any of us have tried for eternity and failed. Beings far stronger than us tried to outpatient him, Harry said. Nobody's ever tried to surprise him with something he has literally never seen, because until 2 weeks ago it didn't exist in this universe. He drew the wand and turned it over in his fingers, and it became a falcon and a wand again, the small impossible thing no one on this world had been built to anticipate. The same thing that had pulled a Doomstone's heart out like loose change and silenced his own heartbeat to a Kryptonian's ears. He spent eternity learning to model power. Strength, speed, energy, will. He's never once in his existence had to model magic, because magic isn't from here. The seed I summoned out of a Doomstone, the door I opened in a vault that held against your best for a decade, the binding I left on a resurrected Dark Lord in a burning square. None of it is force. All of it is the rule underneath force changed. And a being who has spent eternity certain that he understands every possible shape of power is exactly the being you can make flinch once by showing him a shape he has never had to fear. Harry set the wand down on the table, the most dangerous object in 2 universes, a stick. You 4 are how we get to him. You're the loud, glorious frontal assault he expects, and you'll be magnificent at it, and you'll keep 10,000 of his eyes on the front door. And while he's certain he's winning the fight, he understands, I'm going to walk up to God and do something he has never seen, and I'm going to make the most patient being in creation lose his place in his own sentence for exactly 1/2 of 1 second. And if 1/2 second isn't enough, Karen asked. It was the guard's question, the one someone had to ask. Then we're in the worst place in the universe with a god and an unfinished apocalypse, and we improvise. Harry said, with everything we have, which is each other, which is more than he's ever had, because he's spent eternity being patient and alone, and we've spent 2 weeks learning that many beats 1. He looked around the table at the 4 of them, and the alarm in the background was the world's clock running down, the undefended kneeling in the streets, the patient God speaking his gray certainty syllable by syllable into a reality that was running out of people able to refuse it. He built a question with 4 answers and forgot we were 4. Now he's building a sentence with no end, and he's forgotten the same thing. Let's go remind him. Let's go be the variable the patient God never learned to model. Superman, open the door. And the man in blue looked at the man who had fallen out of the sky 2 weeks ago and become, in that impossible span, the one person at the table that everyone else was looking to, and he nodded, and he turned to the great machine at the heart of the station that could tear a hole between worlds, and he began with grave and deliberate hands to open a door onto the worst place in the universe. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, The Anti-Life Gambit. They came through the door into a sky the color of a banked forge, and the worst place in the universe rose up to meet them, and Harry Potter discovered that all his careful imagining had not prepared him for the simple scale of a planet that had been tortured into a weapon. Apocalypse had no horizon, only fire pits receding into a red haze and foundries the size of mountain ranges, and a heat that should have flayed them and instead broke against the five of them like everything else on this world broke against power that had decided not to yield. The throne sat at the center of it all, a wound within a wound, a column of black stone rising out of the deepest pit, and on the throne sat the patience that had been speaking a sentence into the minds of two universes for the better part of a day. Even from the air, even across the impossible distance, Harry felt the gray reach of the equation thicken here, this close to its source, and felt the four beside him stiffen against it, and felt his own mind catch the cold logic and refuse it again. The bare ungovernable no that was the only weapon any of them had against the sum. And then the army saw them, and the noise began. 10,000 parademons rose off the fire pits at once, a single will wearing 10,000 bodies, and the air between the heroes and the throne became a solid thing, a wall of leather wings and engineered hate that stretched from the molten ground to the burning sky. It was, Harry understood, exactly the wall the god had built his entire war world to be, the grinding frontal defense that had broken every glorious assault in the history of creation, and it was waiting for them to do the thing the strong always did, which was to throw themselves against it. "This is the part," Harry said over the channel, "where you four are magnificent and loud and impossible to ignore, and I become a rumor. You know the plan. Keep every eye on the front door. Make him certain he's winning the fight he understands. Give me a road to the throne, and don't, whatever happens, come after me until it's done, because the whole thing only works if he never thinks of me as the threat." "Go be a rumor," Diana said, and the lasso came alight in her hand. "We will give you a road." And they gave it to him. Superman went first because Superman was the thing this universe had spent years learning to fear, and he hit the wall of parademons like the world's own fist, and the wall buckled. Diana came behind him singing, the lasso a wheel of light, 3,000 years of war made into a single advancing point. Kara and Karen took the flanks, the two near-mirror faces blazing through the hive on either side, bright fury and blunt avalanche, and the 10,000 eyes of the single apocalyptian will turned, exactly as Harry had promised they would, toward the four loud glorious answers throwing themselves against the front door of a god's house. And Harry Potter cast a disillusionment charm woven through with a muffliato and a notice-me-not, the humble toolkit of a wizard who had spent a war learning to move through rooms full of people who wanted him dead, and he silenced his own starlit heart to every sense the hive possessed, and he became, in the middle of the loudest battle two universes had ever seen, a thing that was simply not noticed. And he flew low and quiet along the road his lovers were carving in blood and fire toward the throne of the patient god. It nearly worked clean. It would have worked clean against any enemy in this universe, because no enemy in this universe had ever had reason to learn what Harry was hiding behind. But the god had a knife he had found in the dirt, and the knife had spent 17 years studying the exact shape of Harry Potter, and the knife knew, better than any parademon or any god, what an empty space in the middle of a battlefield meant. Voldemort was waiting for him at the foot of the throne. He had not been recalled to the throne as an honored herald. Harry saw that at once, saw it in the way the resurrected Dark Lord stood half in shadow at the base of the black column, the apocalyptian fire along his limbs guttering lower than it had in the Carpathian Square, a knife that had been used hard and was already, exactly as the god had promised it, beginning to go dull. But he was not bound anymore, and he was watching the empty space where Harry's disillusioned form moved with the red and lidless eyes of a creature that had spent half a lifetime learning to find Harry Potter in places he could not be seen. "I know you're there," Voldemort said softly, and the words stopped Harry in the air. "Your god of cruelty cannot see you. His 10,000 eyes slide right past the hole in the world where you are flying. I told him your power was a thing he had no model for, and he did not believe me because he is too old and too certain to believe that anything could exist he had not already conquered. So he sent me to the foot of his throne to be discarded, and instead I have spent my last usefulness waiting here in the one place you must come, for the one thing in all of creation I can still do." The fire flared, a knife finding its last edge. I can see you, Harry. I will always be able to see you. It is the only gift my hatred ever gave me, and it is enough. Harry dropped the charms. There was no point in them now, and there was a thing he had to do here, and he had decided, flying the long, quiet road to the throne, that he would not do it as a rumor. You're dull, Tom, he said gently, hanging in the burning air a dozen feet from the creature that had murdered his parents in 2 universes worth of nightmare. He told you would be. A knife he found in the dirt, used until it's blunt and left where the next one turns up. Look at you. The fire's going out of you already. He gave you a measure of a god's power, and he's already taking it back, because you served your purpose, which was to make me grieve in a burning square for an afternoon, and there's nothing left for you to cut. He did not raise the wand. I could set you aside again. I bound you once today. I could do it again and walk past you to the throne, and you'd be a footnote in a war you were never really part of. That's what he expects. That's what I'd have done at 17, set you aside, kept my eyes on the bigger thing, told myself you didn't matter. Then do it, Voldemort hissed, and there was something underneath the hate now, something that might, in a creature capable of it, have been despair. Set me aside, prove that I am nothing. It is the only victory left to either of us. No, Harry said, because you do matter, and pretending you don't is the lie I've been telling about you since I got here, and I'm finished with lies. You matter because you're the proof of the thing this whole war turns on. You had everything he's offering me. Power past any reasonable measure, the chance to be the strongest thing in the room, in every room, forever. You bled your own soul apart to get it, and it made you this. A dull knife at the foot of a colder master's throne, so hollowed out by the wanting that the only thing you had left to feel was hatred for the one person who chose differently. Harry's voice did not rise, and the gentleness in it was the cruelest thing he could have offered, because it was real. I'm not going to set you aside, Tom. I'm going to do the thing nobody ever did for you, the thing that might have saved you if anyone had done it before you were too far gone to take it. I'm going to give you the choice you spent your whole existence proving didn't exist. And Harry Potter held out his hand, palm up, in the heart of the worst place in the universe, to the resurrected ruin of his oldest enemy, and offered him the one thing Lord Voldemort had never once been offered in 2 lifetimes of fear, a way to be something other than a weapon. He's going to discard you the second I'm past you, Harry said. You know it. You've always known it. You can spend your last edge throwing yourself at me, and I'll set you aside, and you'll have proven nothing except that you stayed a knife to the end. Or you can do the one thing he could never model either, the one thing that would make even a god flinch, and you can choose, for the first and last time in your whole existence, to be on the side of the person who didn't want to kill you. Help me stop the sentence. Cut the hand that's holding you instead of the throat that pities you. I can't promise it redeems you. I don't think anything redeems what you've done. But I can promise it's the first free thing you'd ever do, and the first free thing is the only thing the equation can't account for, and right now, in this moment, the first free thing might just save 2 universes. He held the hand steady. Choose, Tom. Not because it's reasonable, because you can. For one long moment in the red light of a god's foundry, the thing that had been Lord Voldemort stared at the open hand of the one who would not stay killed, and something moved behind the lidless eyes that Harry had never seen there before in any nightmare, in any war, a flicker of the person who had been a boy himself once, before he had decided that the answer to fear was to stop being able to love. He did not take the hand. Harry had not truly expected him to. A creature does not unmake half a lifetime of choosing in a single moment, and Tom Riddle had been choosing the same thing for so long that the muscle of choosing otherwise had wasted entirely away. But he did not throw himself at Harry either, and that, it turned out, was its own kind of answer, the most that a thing so far gone could give. I cannot, Voldemort said, and for the first time in either of their long, entangled lives, the voice held no triumph and no threat, only the flat exhaustion of a creature looking at a door it had walled up so long ago it could no longer find the frame. You understand that I cannot. The thing you are asking me to do, I unmade in myself before you were born. There is no hand left in me to take yours with. The fire guttered lower. But I will tell you a thing, Harry Potter, because you offered me a choice, and it is the only currency I have left to pay you with. The god cannot be made to flinch by power. You know this, it is your whole plan. I heard you make it in the Foundry's echoes. But you are wrong about the shape of the flinch. He will not flinch at a power he cannot model. He has been surprised before by strength, by speed, by will, and absorbed it and adapted. He will flinch at one thing only. The red eyes held Harry's. He will flinch at being seen. Truly seen, the way you see people. You looked at me for 9 seconds in a hospital corridor I was not even in and named the thing I had hidden from myself for 50 years. That is the power he has no model for, not the magic, the seeing. He has spent eternity being the one who measures and is never measured. Measure him. Look at the patient God and name the thing he has hidden from himself, and you will have your half second, because in all of creation no one has ever once looked back. Harry stared at the creature and understood that it had given him the true key, the one that all his cleverness had circled without quite landing on, and understood too that it had cost the thing something to give it, the last edge of a knife spent not on a throat but on a piece of genuine, terrible help. "Why?" Harry said quietly. "Why tell me that?" "Because you offered me a choice," Voldemort said, "and I found that I could not take it, and that is the loneliest thing I have ever known, lonelier than dying, lonelier than the pit. And I find that I would rather the one person who ever offered one than the master who never would." The fire along his limbs sank to embers. "Go. Be the variable, look at him. I have spent my last usefulness and I find, to my own surprise, that I do not regret how I spent it. Tell no one, let them remember me as the knife. It is what I was, but you will know," a pause and the ghost of something almost human. "You always did insist on seeing the actual one." And Harry Potter left his oldest enemy guttering at the foot of the throne, neither bound nor fighting. A knife that had, in its final moment and against the entire grain of its making, declined to cut the hand it was forged to cut, and he turned his face up toward the patient god, and he began to climb. The road up to the throne was the longest mile Harry had ever flown, and he flew it slowly on purpose, because Voldemort had given him the true key and the key needed turning in his own mind before it could turn in the lock. He had built his whole plan on the wrong premise. He understood that now, climbing through the red haze with the foundries roaring beneath him and the war at the front door a distant glory at his back. He had thought the thing that would make a god flinch was magic, the power Darkseid had no model for, and he had been half right, the way a wrong answer is sometimes half right, close enough to be dangerous. The magic was how he had reached the throne unseen. But the magic would not have made the god flinch, because the god had spent eternity absorbing every shape of power thrown at him, and a new shape would only have been a new thing to grind down. The knife at the foot of the throne, dull and discarded and somehow at the last honest, had seen the deeper truth that all of Harry's cleverness had circled and missed. The god had never been seen. It was such a simple thing and so enormous. In all his eternity, the patient god had been the one who measured. He had reduced the entire furniture of creation to objects he weighed and never once to a gaze that weighed him back. And a being that has never been seen has never had to survive being seen, and there is no defense in all the armories of a war world against the one weapon you have never once in forever had reason to fear. Harry had spent his whole life on the wrong side of exactly that loneliness, looked at by millions and seen by almost none, the chosen one and the symbol and the surface, and the loneliness had taught him, from the inside, precisely how to do the thing to someone else that no one had ever quite managed to do for him. It was the cruelest weapon he owned, and it was also the only honest one, and he turned it over in his mind as he climbed and understood that he could not fake it. He could not look at Darkseid and perform a seeing for tactical advantage and expect it to land. The god would feel the lie the way Diana's rope felt a lie. To make the most frightened being in creation flinch, Harry would have to actually see him, actually find the terror at the bottom of an eternity of patience and name it without contempt and without triumph, as he had named the thing in a girl in a hospital doorway, as he had named the guard in Karen and the walled-up boy in Tom Riddle. He would have to look at the worst thing in two universes and find underneath the horror, the frightened thing that had made the horror, and he would have to mean it. He was not sure he could. That was the part he had not said to anyone, not to Diana on the station, not to Kara in the quiet hour, not even to himself until the climb forced it up where he had to look at it. It is one thing to see the wound in someone you are learning to love. It is another to look at the architect of two universes worth of suffering, the thing that had emptied towns and harvested freighters and reached into a billion skulls to turn the lights down to gray, and find in yourself the willingness to see it truly rather than simply hate it. Hate would have been so much easier. Hate was always easier. The whole of Apocalypse was a monument to how much easier hate was than the alternative. But Harry had spent his life refusing the easier thing, and he had beaten Voldemort by being a creature his enemy could not model, and he had refused the anti-life equation with a no that did not need to be reasonable, and he understood, climbing the last of the long red road, that the seeing was the same refusal in a different key. The refusal to let even a god be only the worst thing about him. The insistence which he had carried into a body that could level mountains and which the body had not changed at all, on looking at the actual one. I read the letters, he thought, climbing the old stubborn principle that had walked him past a parking violation sign and into a vault that should have killed him. Somebody should read the letters, even his, especially his. The frightened god has been writing the same letter for 10 billion years and no one has ever once read it back to him, and that is the whole of what is wrong with him, and it is the one thing I know how to do. He reached the level of the throne. The heat fell away from him and the war fell away beneath him and the red air went still, and there before him was the landscape that had been given a will, the oldest and most frightened thing in all of creation, certain of its victory, blind in the one direction no enemy had ever come from. Harry Potter steadied the seeing in himself as he had once steadied a wand, and waited for the road below to finish being won. While Harry climbed, the four of them held the front door of a god's house, and it was the kind of battle that gets sung about for 3,000 years, except that none of them expected to survive to do the singing, and so they fought it the way you fight a thing you do not expect to walk away from, which is to say, beautifully and without holding anything back. Superman was the hammer. He had always been the hammer in the end, beneath the kindness and the careful restraint, and on Apocalypse he set the restraint down because there was nothing here to break that was not already a weapon aimed at someone he loved. He drove into the hive like a falling sun, and where he struck, the single will that wore 10,000 bodies came apart into 10,000 merely mortal things. And he did not stop, did not slow, did not give the hive a single second to close the wound he was tearing toward the throne, because every second he bought was a second of the quiet road Harry needed, and the man in blue had decided that he would spend himself entirely rather than let that road close. Diana was the spear. She fought as she had on the seawall of the Messira for 30 centuries, the last a wheel of light that did not merely bind but revealed, so that every war thing it touched was shown, for one instant, the truth of what it was, an enslaved will wearing a manufactured body, and some of them, shown their own truth, simply stopped, the hive's grip on them broken by a rope that made things tell themselves the truth. She advanced through a falling sky of leather wings and never once through a wasted motion, 3,000 years of war distilled into a single relentless point. And she sang as she went the old songs, so that the worst place in the universe rang for the length of one battle, with the music of a people who had decided before history that they would never kneel. And on the flanks, the two who wore almost the same face turned the hive's own numbers into the hive's own grave. Kara Zor-El fought as she did everything, which was with her whole heart showing. And on Apocalypse that meant she fought weeping because she could see what the Parademons had been, could see the conquered worlds in the shape of their stolen bodies. And she struck them down anyway and grieved them anyway, and did not let the grief slow her hand or harden her heart, because the hardening was the one victory she had sworn the dark would never have. She was a verb in the burning air, the act of refusing to let the innocent fall made into a body of light, and the hive broke against her brightness in a way it had no model for, because the hive had conquered 1,000 worlds and had never once been fought by something that mourned it. Power Girl fought as she argued, which was bluntly and without subtlety, and with a magnificent indifference to elegance. Where Kara wept, Karen swore, a continuous furious profane commentary on the architecture and parentage and personal failings of every war thing she dismantled. And she planted herself at the widest breach in the hive's wall and simply would not be moved, an avalanche that had decided to hold still, a wall of one woman against a wall of 10,000 bodies, and the 10,000 learned what every wall that had ever stood against Karen's star learned. Which was that she did not tire and she did not yield and she did not, under any circumstances Apocalypse could manufacture, shut up, it should not have been enough. Four beings, however magnificent, against the massed will of a war world that had broken the resistance of 1,000 civilizations, against a hive that did not feel pain or fear or exhaustion, against a planet engineered for exactly this grinding work. By every arithmetic of war it should have ended in 4 bright candles snuffed in the general dark, and the patient god, measuring the front door through a fraction of his attention, judged that it would, and returned the bulk of his vast cold mind to the sum. What the arithmetic of war did not account for, what the patient god in his certainty could not model, was the thing the four of them had that the hive did not, which was not power, because the hive had power, and was not numbers, because the hive had numbers, but was the simple irreducible fact that each of the four was fighting for the others and not merely beside them. The hive was 10,000 bodies and one will. The four were 4 wills and one cause, and the difference, which a god who feared free choice could never measure, was everything. When Superman tired, Diana's song reached him and he did not tire. When Diana was surrounded, Kara was there before the circle closed. When Kara faltered under the weight of her own grief, Karen's blunt fury hauled her back into the light. They covered each other's holes exactly as Harry had said many would, each of them holding the front the others could not, and the hive, which had only ever fought things that fought alone, found that it could not close a wound that 4 hands kept open at once. So they held. Bleeding, scorched slower with every passing minute, they held the front door of a god's house, and they kept 10,000 eyes fixed on the loud glorious answers throwing themselves against the wall, and not one of those eyes turned to mark the quiet hole in the world climbing the long road toward the throne, because the god was certain he was winning the fight he understood, and certainty, Harry had told them, was the one thing they had to sell him. And they sold it with their bodies and their blood and the whole magnificent loud spectacle of four heroes, apparently making the oldest mistake in war. "He's at the throne," Kara gasped over the channel, her senses cutting through the chaos to the one heartbeat she would have found at the bottom of any ocean. "He's there. He made it. Whatever he's going to do, he's about to do it. Hold, everyone hold, give him his half-second." And they held and they gave it to him, and high above the burning road at the level of the Black Throne, in the presence of the oldest and most frightened will in all of creation, Harry Potter stopped climbing and hung in the red air before the patient god, and prepared to do the one thing in two universes that no being had ever dared. Up close, the patient god was not a figure on a throne. He was a landscape that had been given a will, and the will was the oldest thing Harry had ever stood in the presence of, older than Diana, older than the dead empire that had remade him. A thing that had been grinding the universe down toward a single gray obedience for so long that the grinding had stopped being a means and become the whole of what it was. Darkseid did not look at Harry as he rose to the level of the throne. That was the first thing, and it told Harry everything Voldemort had promised it would. The god did not look at him because the god did not look at anything. Looking was a thing you did to appear, an equal, a threat worth the cost of attention. And in all his eternity, Darkseid had reduced the entire furniture of creation to objects he measured, and never once to a gaze that might measure back. His vast cold attention was turned wholly inward, on the equation, on the impossible sum nearing its final clause, and the four bright answers blazing through his army at the front door were less to him than weather, and the one who had flown the quiet road to his throne was nothing at all. "You are the candle," Darkseid said. He did not turn. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It arrived the way the equation arrived, from underneath, a thing felt in the foundations of the self. The one mind in a burning square that would not close. "I marked you and judged you beneath the cost of my notice. I do not revise such judgments. In a moment I will speak the final clause, and your refusal will end with every other, and the small flame of you will gutter out in the general dark. You have come a very long way to be a footnote, little power. It is the common fate of those who believe their resistance means something." And Harry Potter, hanging in the red air before the oldest will in creation, did the thing no being in all of eternity had ever done to Darkseid. He did not attack. He did not refuse. He did not throw his power against a thing built across forever to grind power down. He looked. He turned on the patient god the whole of the faculty that two universes had taught him, the seeing that was not a read but a recognition, the thing he had done to a girl in a hospital doorway, and a guard on the edge of a parking structure, and a dark lord at the foot of a throne. The simple, terrible attention of a person who had spent his whole life being looked at and not seen, and had decided in response to become someone who saw. He looked at the landscape that had been given a will, and he looked past the will, down through the eternities of patience and conquest and the methodical darkening of worlds, all the way down to the thing at the bottom, the thing the god had hidden from himself so long ago and so completely that he had forgotten it was hidden, and Harry found it and named it out loud in a voice that did not shake. "You're afraid," Harry said. The red air went still. "That's it, that's the thing at the bottom of you. Under all the patience, under eternity, under the grinding, you're not darkening the universe because you hate it. Hate's too warm for you. You're darkening it because a universe full of free minds is a universe that might, any one of them at any moment, choose something you didn't predict, and you cannot bear it. You spent forever building a proof that free will is a lie because free will is the one thing you were never able to control in yourself, the one variable you couldn't grind down, and so you decided to grind it out of everything else instead. The anti-life equation isn't a weapon, it's a confession. It's the longest, coldest, most elaborate way a frightened thing has ever found to say, "I cannot stand not knowing what you'll do next." Harry held the god's hidden core in the light of his attention, gently as he held everything true. Somebody saw you once a long time ago and you couldn't survive being seen, so you decided no one would ever see anything again. I see you, Darkseid, I see the actual one. And the actual one is the most frightened being in all of creation, and has been this entire time. And the patient god who had measured everything and been measured by nothing in all his eternity, who had reduced creation to objects and never once been the object of a gaze that reached his bottom, flinched. It was not a large thing. It lasted exactly the half-second Harry had promised the war table it would last. The vast cold attention, for the first time in the memory of the universe, was wrenched outward and downward and back upon itself, forced to look at the thing that had just looked at it, forced to feel the unbearable sensation of being seen all the way to the floor. And in that half-second of wrenched attention, the anti-life equation, the impossible sum that depended utterly on the unbroken concentration of its prover, lost its place. Across two universes, the gray receded. Harry felt it go. He felt the cold logic pull back out of a billion undefended minds at once. felt the woman on the curb pick her groceries back up and the man on the bridge put his hands back on the wheel, and the whole vast thinning noise of a planet's hope come rushing back in. The arguments and the prayers and the bargains and the unkillable ordinary refusal of people to stop mattering, all of it flooding back into the space the half-second had opened. The sentence was not finished. The sentence would have to be begun again, every term of it, every eternity-derived clause from the beginning, because a proof that loses its prover's attention is not a weapon but only gray noise. And Harry Potter had just made the most patient being in creation lose his place in the longest sentence ever composed. For one shining instant it was one. And then the patient god stopped being patient, and Harry learned the price of making a frightened thing afraid in front of its own army. Darkseid rose from the throne. He had not risen in an age. The standing alone cracked the black column beneath him and sent a tremor through the whole tortured planet. And his vast cold attention, no longer turned inward on a sum that had collapsed, no longer sliding past the hole in the world where a candle flew, turned fully for the first time onto Harry Potter. And Harry understood in that moment that he had been wrong about exactly one thing, and that the one thing was going to cost them everything. He had assumed that making the god flinch was the hard part. It was not. The hard part was surviving the god once the flinch had made him look. "You saw me," Darkseid said, and now the voice was loud. Now it shook the foundries and the fire pits and the burning sky. The sound of an eternity of buried terror converted in an instant into the only thing the god had ever let it become, which was wrath. "In 10 billion years, no thing has ever dared. I will not merely darken your worlds now. I will not speak the equation and grant you the mercy of a quiet gray. I will burn the seeing out of the universe one mind at a time, beginning with yours, and I will make the burning last. And the 4 bright things at my door will watch you end before I attend to them." His eyes kindled, and the kindling was the Omega, the deathlight that even Superman had never stood against, and walked away whole. 2 beams of red certainty that did not travel and did not miss, that simply arrived at whatever the god willed dead. "There is no rule you can change, little power, that is deeper than the rule that says you end when I decide it. Change that one. I will wait. It is the one thing I am still good at." And the Omega found Harry, and even a body that ran on starlight, even a thing that had broken a hawk's talons and caught a Doomstone's heart and held a half-mile bridge in a charm, was not built to stand in the deathlight of a god. And Harry Potter was struck out of the sky over the throne of Apocalypse, the seeing scorched half out of him, falling, burning, the first thing since the vault that had ever truly hurt. He did not fall alone. That was the thing the god had never learned to model, the thing he had forgotten even as the collapse of his own equation should have taught it to him. Diana reached him first, because Diana had been watching the throne the entire time despite his orders, because 3,000 years had taught her that you do not let the one you love climb toward a god without keeping one eye on the climb. She caught him out of the air with the lasso, the cord of truth wrapping his falling, burning body and holding it, and she put herself between Harry and the second blast of the Omega, and the deathlight meant for him struck the Amazon instead and drove her to her knees on the cracked black stone, and she did not let go of the cord. Kara was there in the next instant, and Karen, the 2 near-mirror faces blazing up from the army they had been holding at the door, abandoning the plan, abandoning the road, because the plan had been to keep the god's eyes off Harry, and the god's eyes were on Harry now, and there was nothing left to protect by staying away. They put themselves between the falling man and the rising god, 2 women who wore almost the same face, and Superman came behind them, the 4 of them forming a wall of their own bodies around the burning thing the Omega had cast down, and the god regarded the wall with the contempt of an eternity that had ground 1,000 such walls to dust. "You see," Darkseid said, and the deathlight gathered again behind his terrible eyes, brighter now, the full Omega, the killing measure he had held in reserve. "Love is many. The little power was so proud of it, and many is simply more for me to burn. You have gathered everything you treasure into one place in front of one god and called it strength. I call it convenience." The Omega bloomed, vast and red and final, enough deathlight to unmake the 5 of them at once and the throne beneath them and a mile of the planet besides. "I will not need the equation to darken your worlds. I will simply remove the 4 of you who would have defended them, and then I will begin the sentence again, in a universe that no longer has anyone in it brave enough or foolish enough to look at me. Kneel or do not, it changes nothing. The seeing dies here." And Harry Potter, broken and burning in the arms of the women who had thrown away the only plan that might have saved them rather than let him fall alone, looked up through the scorched ruin of his sight at the gathering deathlight of a god, and understood that his cleverness had run out, that the rule-changing had reached the one rule a god had been right about, that there was nothing left in all his wizard's toolkit that could answer the full Omega, and that the floor he had braced against his whole life was, at last, About to drop, he had one thing left. It was not a spell, and it was not a strength, and it was not a clever inversion of a rule no one else had thought to break. It was the thing Voldemort had failed to take in a hospital corridor he had not been standing in. The thing the equation had broken against in a billion undefended minds. The thing his mother had made in front of a crib and he had made in a forest at 17. The bare ungovernable fact of a will that chose without needing to be reasonable. Don't, he managed, to the four of them, blood in his mouth and the death light filling the sky. Get clear, all of you. That's enough death light to take all 5 of us. You don't have to be here when it lands, please. I can't change his rule, but I can be the thing it lands on. Get clear and let it land on me. And the 4 of them, the brightness and the gravity and the blunt warmth and the man in blue, looked at the broken thing in their arms, asking them with the last of his breath to let him be alone one final time, to let him do the thing he had done his whole life and stand between the people he loved in the end all by himself. And they refused him. No, said Kara, fierce, her arms tightening around him. We talked about this. You don't get to be the catch. No, said Karen, blunt, planting herself square in the path of the Omega. I stopped bracing for the catch. I'm not starting again now. No, said Diana on her knees, the lasso still wrapped around him, the deathlight still smoking off her shoulders where she had taken the first blast meant for him. You asked us on the station to do one impossible thing with everything you had to lose standing beside you. We are beside you. We do not move. No, said Superman simply, and stood. And above them the patient god, the most frightened being in all of creation, loosed the full measure of the Omega upon the 5 who would not kneel and would not scatter and would not let a single one of their number stand alone, and the deathlight fell. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, What the Sun Chose. The deathlight fell, and it did not land, because between the 5 who would not scatter and the full measure of the Omega there was, at the last instant, a sword. Diana rose into it. Scorched kneeling, the first blast still smoking off her shoulders, she came up off the cracked black stone with the lasso in one hand and her sister's gift in the other, the blade that had cut things older than nations, and she met the falling Omega as she had met everything across 3,000 years, which was without flinching and without yielding and without one wasted motion. The deathlight was not a thing a blade could cut, but it was a thing a blade could split for a half-second, for exactly as long as it took an Amazon's whole heart to pour into the splitting. And Diana split it, and the Omega that had been willed to unmake 5 at once forked around the edge of her sword and struck the foundries to either side instead of the people behind her. And the cost of it drove her back down to her knees with the light burning through her, and she did not let go of the sword or the cord or the one the cord still bound. It bought a half-second. Half-seconds, Harry had learned, were the entire currency of this war. And in that half-second, 2 things happened that the patient god in all his eternity had no model for. The first was that Lord Voldemort, dull and discarded at the foot of the throne, a knife with one last edge, did a free thing. Harry felt it before he saw it, felt the shape of a choice being made that should have been impossible for the creature that made it. And then the resurrected Dark Lord was rising off the black stone, the last of his stolen apocalyptian fire gathered into a single spear of it, and he was not pointing it at Harry. For the first and only time in 2 universes worth of his long entangled existence, Tom Riddle turned his power on something other than the one he hated, and he drove his last edge into the back of the throne's foundation, into the column of fused stone that anchored the god to his world. And the spear of fire that could never have harmed Darkseid was never meant to harm Darkseid. It was meant to shatter the stone, and it shattered the stone, and the throne lurched, and the god, for one instant, had to spend a fraction of his vast attention on the simple physical fact of his own seat coming apart beneath him. I cannot take your hand, Harry Potter, Voldemort said, and his ruined voice carried somehow over the roar of the foundries and the war, and there was no triumph in it and no threat, only the strange light exhaustion of a creature setting down a weight it had carried since before it could remember. But I find that I can let go of the throat. Consider it the first free thing. Consider it the last. And the god's attention, wrenched outward by the shattering of his throne, fell upon the knife that had dared to cut the hand instead of the throat, and the Omega found Voldemort, and the thing that had been Lord Voldemort was unmade at last in the heart of the worst place in the universe, by the master he had betrayed in the single act of betrayal that was the only free choice he had ever made. Harry did not look away. He had promised himself he would not look away from the actual one, and so he watched his oldest enemy choose finally against his own forging an end. And he understood that no one else would ever know it, that the universe would remember Tom Riddle as the knife and the murderer and the Dark Lord, and that he alone would carry the truth that in the last half-second of an existence built entirely on the refusal to love, the creature had let go of the throat. It was not redemption. Harry had told him it would not be, but it was a choice freely made, and the equation could not account for it, and it had bought the second half-second, and the second half-second was Harry's. The second thing the god had no model for was that the broken candle he had cast down rose back up out of the arms of the women who loved him, and it was not broken anymore. Harry would never be able to explain afterward exactly what happened in him in that moment, and he would stop trying because some things are truer for not being reduced to their mechanism. He had been scorched half-blind by the Omega. He had been falling burning, the first true pain since the vault. And then he had been caught by a lasso and by 3 sets of arms. By Diana, who split a god's deathlight with a sword and would not let go of the cord, by Kara, who would not let him be the catch, by Karen, who would not start bracing again, and held in the heart of the worst place in the universe, by people who had each freely chosen him and freely refused to let him stand alone. And the holding did the thing the star in the vault had done, except deeper. Because the star had only given him power, and this gave him the reason to spend it. He had crossed an entire universe, braced for the floor to drop and the loneliness to close back over him like water. And here at the bottom of everything, with a god's killing light in the sky and his own blood in his mouth, the floor had dropped exactly as he had always known it would, and he had not fallen because 4 people had decided to be the floor. The loneliness that had lived in his chest since the war ended, the loneliness that had eased for a breath in an atrium and a little longer on an observation deck and longer still in a quiet hour before the worst battle of his life, simply ended, not lifted, ended. There was no room left in him for it, because every place it had ever lived was full of someone who had stayed. And the power that had been given to a lonely man came up in a man who was not lonely anymore. And it was not the same power, and Harry Potter understood, rising out of the arms of the people he loved with the seeing hole again behind his eyes, and the magic and the starlight braided into a single thing that no longer had any seam at all. What the light in the vault had actually recognized, that first night in the deep reservoir where his magic lived. It had not recognized power. Power was common, every star had it, the god had it in eternal abundance. It had recognized the one thing that made power matter, the thing the dead empire's beacon had been built across 10,000 worlds to find and call home, the thing the anti-life equation existed to disprove and never could, a will that chose to love freely without needing a reason against every proof that it should not. That was what the sun had chosen, not the strongest thing in 2 universes, the one most able to refuse being alone. Darkseid, Harry said, and he rose to the level of the broken throne, and the seeing in him was a light now. The whole of his fused and reasonless and freely chosen self turned upon the oldest fear in creation. You loosed everything you had. The equation, the Omega, 10,000 bodies in one will. You spent eternity learning to grind down every shape of power there is, and you threw all of it at 5 people who would not kneel and would not scatter and look. He spread his hands, and behind him Diana stood, and Kara and Karen and Superman, scorched and bleeding and unbowed, the 4 bright answers to a question the god had forgotten. He asked, "We're still here, every single one of us. You could not make us stop choosing each other. You, the most powerful being in 2 universes, could not do the one thing your whole existence is organized around, which is to prove that a free will can be made to stop. You've been failing at it for 10 billion years. You failed at it today in front of your own army. And the worst part, the part you have spent forever building a war world to avoid feeling, is that I am about to make you watch yourself fail with your eyes open, truly, the way no one has ever once made you do anything." Darkseid did not stand to be bound. No god does. The throne was shattered beneath him, and the equation was guttering, and a thing had dared to see him, and the oldest fear in creation answered the way it had always answered everything, which was to try to unmake the world that had frightened it. The whole of Apocalypse rose to his will at once. The fire pits leaned up out of their beds, columns of foundry flame, the height of mountains bending toward the 5 figures at the broken throne. The black stone of the planet itself cracked and lifted, slabs the size of cities tearing free of the crust to hammer down out of the red sky, and the Omega gathered behind the god's eyes not as 2 beams now, but as a corona, a halo of deathlight that turned the air to furnace, and Darkseid spent in a single instant more raw destruction than he had loosed in the entire war, because the careful, patient grinding was finished, and there was nothing left in him but the terror and the wrath the terror wore. It should have ended them. Any one of those weapons should have ended them. A mountain of foundry fire, a city of falling stone, a corona of Omega, each alone was a thing that had unmade civilizations, and the god loosed all of them together, at 5 people already scorched and bleeding from the first exchange, and by every arithmetic that had ever governed a battlefield it was the end. But the arithmetic had never learned to count the thing the 5 of them were, and so the arithmetic was wrong again, the way it had been wrong at the front door and wrong about the 4 fronts and wrong, in the deepest sense, about everything since a man had fallen out of a sky 2 weeks before. Superman took the falling stone. He went up into the rain of cities with his arms spread, and his jaw set against the impossible weight, and he did not try to stop all of it, because not even he could stop all of it. He steered it, shouldering the largest slabs aside so they fell into the empty fire pits instead of onto the people behind him, a man holding up a collapsing sky with nothing but the refusal to let it land. Kara and Karen took the foundry fire. The two who wore almost the same face flew straight into the leaning columns of flame, and where Kara's freeze breath met the fire it died hissing into steam and frost, and where Karen's fists met it she simply punched the burning columns apart, the two of them carving a breathing space out of a furnace, bright fury and blunt avalanche turning a mountain of fire into a wall of cooling smoke. Diana took the Omega. Again. She had split it once with her sword and paid for it on her knees, and she rose into it a second time because that was who she was, the apex of the spear, the one who stood between, and she met the corona of deathlight with the bracers her mother had given her in 3,000 years of refusing to fall, and the deathlight forked around her and the cost of it would have killed anything that had not spent 30 centuries learning to stand in exactly this kind of fire, and Harry took the god. While the four of them held the unholdable, while they shouldered a sky and quenched a furnace and split a halo of death, Harry Potter flew through the gap their courage had torn in the apocalypse, straight at the broken throne, straight at the oldest fear in creation, and he did not fly alone, because as he went he felt the four of them reach for him through the chaos. Felt Diana's free hand close over his, and Kara's over Diana's, and Karen's over Kara's, and Superman's over Karen's. A chain of hands stretched across a collapsing battlefield, four people pouring everything they had left through the cord of themselves into the one at the point of the spear, so that when Harry reached the throne he was not carrying only his own power anymore. He was carrying theirs, all of it. The brightness and the gravity and the blunt warmth and the man in blue, the harbor and the city and the fast man and the love that is many, every refusal any of them had ever made against the dark, gathered and braided and handed forward into the one of them best placed to spend it. It was the thing the equation had been built across 10 billion years to prove impossible, the thing the god feared more than any weapon, free will's choosing as one without any of them being made smaller for the choosing, and it came up in Harry Potter like a second sun rising inside the first. The god saw it. For one instant, through the Omega and the falling sky and the furnace, the most frightened being in all of creation saw the chain of hands and understood what it was, and the understanding was the beginning of the end of him, because he had spent forever certain that many was only more for him to burn, and here at last was the proof, flying straight at his throne, that many was the one thing he had never been able to burn at all. Harry rose to the level of the broken throne with 2 universes worth of refusal braided in his hands, and behind him his lovers and his friend held up an apocalypse with their bodies so that he would have the 1/2 second he needed, and Diana, bleeding deathlight, her sword in one hand and her whole heart in the other, pressed the lasso of truth into his palm. He raised the cord. He had one cast and everything they had left was in it, and it had to hold. The lasso of truth was not built to bind a god. It was built to bind the truth, which is a different and larger thing, and that distinction was the whole of what saved 2 universes that day. Harry cast it, and as it left his hand he wrapped it in every binding charm 11 years of magic had given him and fed the bindings a star, so that the cord of truth that no light could escape became, for one impossible moment, a cord that no power could break either. Magic and Amazon craft braided as seamlessly as the 2 halves of Harry himself, and it settled glowing around the landscape that had been given a will, around the oldest and most frightened thing in all of creation, and it held. Darkseid moved against it, and the move shook Apocalypse to its molten roots, and the cord held. He brought the Omega up behind his eyes to burn the truth out of the air, and the cord held because you cannot will the truth to die. That is the one thing even the anti-life equation could never quite manage, and the lasso was the truth made into a rope. The god strained against a thing that had been forged to bind exactly this, the refusal to see, and Harry stood at the other end of the cord with the seeing hole in him and his lovers at his back and his oldest enemy's free choice still warm in the air, and he asked the patient god the only question that had ever mattered. "Say it," Harry said, "that's all. You've spent 10 billion years building a proof that no one is free, and the proof is a rope around your own throat because the proof is a lie and the lasso is the truth and the 2 of them cannot share a body. So say the true thing instead, just once. Say what's at the bottom of you. You'll feel it pulling the word up out of you already. That's the cord. It doesn't hurt. It only makes the lie impossible. Say it, Darkseid, out loud in front of your army. The thing no one has ever made you say." And the god of cruelty, the most powerful being in 2 universes, bound in a cord of truth that no force could break, opened the ancient ruin of his mouth, and the equation died in it, every eternity-derived term of it unraveling as the lie that powered it met the rope that forbade lies, and what came up out of Darkseid instead, dragged into the red air by a truth he had spent forever building a world to avoid, was 3 words. Spoken in a voice that had never once in all its eternity been anything but certain, and was, for the first and only time, afraid. "I am afraid." Across 2 universes, the last gray ember of the anti-life equation went out. It went out in a billion minds at once, the cold logic dissolving like frost in sun. And the woman who had set down her groceries wept and did not know why. And the man who had stopped his car drove on, and the great human noise of a planet, the arguments and the prayers and the bargains and the unkillable refusal to stop mattering, came roaring back into every place the gray had thinned and did not leave again. Because the proof that had been built to silence it had just been disproven by the only authority that could disprove it, which was its own author, bound in truth, saying the thing the whole edifice existed to deny. Harry did not gloat. That was the thing Diana would remember, the thing Kara would tell the story of for the rest of a very long life, the thing that finally fully made Karen's star stop bracing for the catch. The man who had bound a god in a rope of truth and forced him to confess his fear in front of his own army did not laugh, did not crow, did not reach for the throat the way every conqueror in the history of either universe would have. He looked at the most frightened being in all of creation, truly seen at last, and the thing on his face was not triumph. "I know," Harry said quietly to the bound god, "I know you are. You've been afraid for 10 billion years, and you turned the whole of creation into a machine for not feeling it, and you very nearly succeeded, and the trying made you the worst thing that has ever existed. I'm not going to pretend that what you've done can be forgiven. Towns, worlds, the minds you switched off. There's no rope and no seeing that makes that anything other than what it is." He drew a breath, and the seeing held, and the mercy in it was a harder thing than any blow. "But I'm also not going to do the thing you've spent forever proving is the only thing anyone ever does. I'm not going to destroy the thing that frightens me. That's your move. That's the whole of your move, the only move you've got, the move at the bottom of the equation and the omega and the 10,000 bodies and one will. See a thing you can't control and end it. I'm not you, so I'm not going to end you." His voice did not rise. "I'm going to do something worse for you and better for everyone else. I'm going to send you somewhere you can finally sit with the truth you just spoke, alone, with nothing left to grind down and no one left to switch off, and you can spend a while being the thing you've spent eternity running from. A free will, with nothing to conquer, sitting with itself in the dark. That's not a punishment I'm inventing for you. It's just the inside of you, made into a room." And Harry Potter turned to the man in blue, who had carried them here through a door of his own making. And Superman understood without a word, the way the people who fought gods had learned to understand each other, and he gave Harry the means, the same world-tearing science that had opened the door onto apocalypse. And Harry took it and wrapped it in the oldest banishing magic he knew, the spell a wizard uses to send a thing back where it belongs. Except that he reached past every place that was and found a place that was nowhere. A sealed and silent pocket of unbeing with no exit and no neighbor and no thing at all in it to rule. And he opened a door onto it one way, and with the lasso of truth still binding the god and the whole fused weight of magic and starlight and three women's hands closing over his on the cord, he cast the most frightened being in all of creation through the door, and sealed it, and the seal was a truth too. The simple, unanswerable truth that some things have to be set where they can no longer reach the people they would hurt, and the truth held the door shut the way the truth had held the god. The throne of fused black stone stood empty. The hive felt it first. 10,000 bodies and one will, and the will was gone through a door into nowhere, and the 10,000 bodies, suddenly merely themselves, merely the conquered and the enslaved and the engineered, faltered at the front door of a god's house that no longer had a god in it, and the war simply stopped, the way a clenched hand stops when the arm is severed, and across the burning sky of apocalypse the parademons drifted leaderless, the single dreadful purpose that had animated them lifted all at once. And many of them, freed, did the thing the freed do, which was to not know what to do at all. "It's over," Kara breathed, hovering close, her senses sweeping a battlefield gone abruptly quiet. "The equation's gone, Earth all of it, 2 universes worth of it, the Grey's gone, they're all themselves again. And she looked at the empty throne. "He's just gone, you didn't kill him, you sent him to a room. Harry, you stood over the worst thing in creation with a god and a rope and your whole power loose and you sent him to a room. Killing him was his move," Harry said. He was so tired. The seeing had cost him, and the Omega had cost him, and the long road had cost him, and he let himself sag, finally, into the arms that were already there to catch him. "I spent my whole life refusing to become the thing I was fighting. I wasn't going to lose that at the very end in front of the 4 of you after everything. A room he can't get out of is the safest thing for everyone who's still alive, and it's the only honest answer to a thing whose whole crime was that it couldn't stand to leave free things free." He managed something that was nearly a smile. "Besides, I read his letter. Somebody should read the letters, even his, especially his. And then I sealed it in a drawer where it can't burn anything down." Diana set her sword and her lasso both at her hip, and she came and took his scorched face in both her hands as she had touched him in a mountain town a lifetime and 2 weeks ago, and she looked at him with 3,000 years in her eyes and the comitraire smile breaking across her face. "You changed the rules," she said. Even the last rule, even the one he was right about, you found a way to win that did not require you to become him. In all my years I have seen courage past counting, and cleverness and power. I have not before today seen mercy used as a weapon and a god undone by being truly seen. She pressed her forehead to his, the Amazon farewell that was also a vow. Whatever you are, Harry Potter who fell out of the sky, the light that made you chose well. I will say so for as long as I live, and I will live a very long time. They went home through Superman's door, the five of them, the worst place in the universe falling away behind them, and they came out into the clean blue light of the world they had saved. And the world was loud again, gloriously, ordinarily loud. A billion minds arguing and praying and bargaining and refusing to stop mattering, and Harry hung in the high air over it and listened to all of it at once and could have wept from the sound. The recovering took time. The equation had reached far and the gray had taken root in the undefended places. And there were people across two worlds who would carry the memory of having knelt, of having almost set everything down, and there were towns that had been emptied and freighters that would never come home and an Arctic station that had gone silent forever. And the saving of the world did not unmake any of that. Harry knew it would not. He had saved worlds before, and he had learned that the saving was never clean, that there was always a cost already paid before you arrived and a grief left over after you won, and that the only honest thing was to stand in it rather than pretend the victory had been total. So he stood in it. They all did, the five of them, in the long weeks after, helping a world remember how to be itself, and Harry did not fly off to a moor to be alone with what he had become, because he was not alone with what he had become anymore, and that, more than the binding of a god, was the thing the war had actually changed in him. He carried one truth alone, and only one. He never told them what Voldemort had done at the foot of the throne, the spear turned on the stone instead of the throat, the first free thing and the last. He let the universe remember Tom Riddle as the knife, because the knife was what he had chosen to be for almost the whole of 2 long existences, and because the single free choice at the end did not erase the rest and Harry would not pretend it did. But he carried it. The way you carry the letters no one else will read. The way he had always carried the things other people found it easier to forget. And on the rare quiet nights when the weight of it pressed, one of the three would find him at a window with the world turning below, and would not ask because they had each learned the shape of him and would simply stay, which was the only answer that had ever helped and the only one he had ever wanted. He gave himself to the slow work of it as he had once given himself to war completely, because it was the part that actually mattered, and the part that no one ever sang about. There were the towns to be rebuilt, the ones Apocalypse had emptied for raw material, and Harry flew the rubble out and the timber in and learned the names of the people who had lost the most and read, when there were letters to read, the letters. There were the ones who had knelt in the streets and carried the memory of having almost set everything down. And for them there was no rebuilding. Only the slow human work of sitting with someone while they decided again, freely, that they still wanted to be themselves. And Harry did a great deal of that work too, because it turned out that a man who had refused the anti-life equation with his own mind was uniquely placed to tell the people who had nearly lost theirs that the wanting to stop had not been them. Had never been them, had only ever been a frightened things lie wearing their own voice. And in the evenings, when the work let go of them, there were the three of them, and there was the strange new architecture of a life he was still learning the floor plan of. It was not simple. He had promised them on a rooftop that he would not pretend it was simple, and he kept the promise by living inside the complications rather than around them. There were nights when Corinne's old habit of bracing for the catch flared back up, and she picked a fight about nothing because a fight about nothing was easier than the terror of having something to lose. And Harry learned to recognize the shape of it and not take the bait and not let her run, to sit in the difficult middle of it until the guard came down. There were the long, quiet conversations with Diana about time, about the thing neither of them could promise the other, about how to love something fully while knowing the arithmetic of how it ends. And Harry found that the only honest answer was the one he had given her on the station, that they were exactly the wrong people to be careful with each other, and so they would not be. There were the bright, fierce mornings with Kara, who loved the most openly of any of them and therefore risked the most, and who needed sometimes to be reminded that her openness was a strength and not a wound waiting to happen, and Harry reminded her, and was reminded back because he needed the same thing and had needed it his whole life. They did not all live in one another's pockets. Kara had her city and Corinne had her company and Diana had her embassy and her island, and the patient diplomacy of being the bridge between the world of women and the world of men. Harry had, for the first time he could remember, the luxury of choosing what to do with a day, and he spent the days in the recovering and the evenings with whichever of the three the day had left him near, and the four of them found a rhythm that no one had written a rule book for, and made the rulebook up as they went, with open eyes and honest conversations and the worst possible timing, exactly as promised. Hermione came through the breach once to see for herself because she had not believed any of it could be as uncomplicatedly good as Harry's messages made it sound and had come, she said, to find the catch. She stayed 3 days. She left having found no catch, only her oldest friend at a window with the world turning below him, not alone, looking like a person rather than a monument. And she hugged him at the breach and told him she had spent 8 years afraid he would die the loneliest hero who ever lived, and that she was going home lighter than she had arrived. And Harry held on to her and understood that the loneliness which had defined him was now a thing he could remember rather than a thing he lived inside. And that the remembering did not hurt, as he had once assumed it would. He carried Voldemort's last choice alone, and he carried the names of the emptied towns, and he carried the memory of a god's 3 true words spoken in a rope. Some weights do not get set down. But he had learned in 2 weeks and then in the long months after that the difference between a weight that breaks you and a weight you can carry is not the weight. It is whether you carry it alone. There was an evening near the end of the 2nd month that Harry would come back to for the rest of a very long life, not because anything happened in it, but because nothing did. The 4 of them had ended up over Metropolis Bay at dusk, where it had all started for him, and they were not fighting anything, and no god was measuring anyone, and no door hung burning in the sky. Kara had challenged Karen to a race around the harbor and lost it loudly, and demanded a rematch, and lost that too. And Diana had refereed with the grave impartiality of a woman adjudicating a war, and then quietly cheated on Kara's behalf in the 3rd heat out of what she called strategic mercy. Harry had floated on his back in the high cold air, and watched the 3 of them turn the bay into a playground. 3 of the most powerful beings in 2 universes behaving, for one bracketed hour, like people who were simply glad to be alive and together and unobserved. He had spent his whole life waiting for the cost of every good thing, braced for the bill that always came due. He waited for it that evening too, out of long habit, lying on the air with the first stars coming out. It did not come. There was only the bay going gold and then gray, and Karen swearing carrying across the water, and Kara's bright furious laugh, and Diana drifting up to float beside him without a word because she had learned the shape of his silences and knew this one did not want filling. And Harry understood, watching the wrong and beautiful stars come out over a city he had caught a bridge above on his first morning here, that some good things do not have a bill. That the loneliness had not been the price of his power, only the absence of this, and that the absence was over. He had crossed a universe to learn it, and he would have crossed 100 more. So, Karen said a month after the throne, on the roof of Stairware where the whole improbable thing had been spoken aloud the first time. The 4 of them were there again, and the city glittered below, ordinary and saved and entirely unaware of how close it had come. Refugee or visitor? You said you wanted to find out whether the door opened both ways before you decided. Well, it opens both ways. Clark's tech can put you back in your own sky anytime you want it. Your friend, the clever one, Hermione, she's been sending messages through the breach for 3 weeks asking when you're coming home. She said it blunt as she said everything, but Harry had learned to hear the thing underneath the blunt, and the thing underneath was a guard who had stopped bracing for the catch and was now, against all her long habit, afraid of losing the best thing that had ever happened to her, and would rather ask the hard question outright than wait for it to ambush her. So which is it? You going home? Harry was quiet for a moment, watching the lights of the city he had caught a bridge over on his first morning here. I went home, actually, he said, last week. Clark opened the door and I went back and I saw Hermione, and I told her everything, and I sat in my own sky under my own stars for a whole night to find out what it felt like. He turned to look at the 3 of them, the brightness and the gravity and the blunt warmth, the whole impossible shape of the life he had found on the far side of a door he had not known was a door. And it felt like a place I used to live. Hermione understood. She always understands. She told me she'd spent 8 years watching me be the strongest and loneliest person in every room, and that she had never once seen me look the way I looked when I talked about the 3 of you, and that if I came back to my old sky to be lonely again out of some idea that it was where I was supposed to be, she would never forgive me, and she would be right. He came and sat on the parapet, and Kara leaned into him on one side, and Diana took his hand, and Karen, after a moment, bumped his shoulder hard enough to stagger a tank, which from Karen was the whole of a heart laid open. I was a refugee. I crossed a universe by accident, running from a thing I'd survived, braced for the floor to drop. But you can't be a refugee from a place where you've stopped being alone. That's just home. So, he spread his free hand at the glittering city, the turning world, the 3 women who had each freely chosen him and freely chosen in their different unbookkept ways to share him. I'm staying, if you'll have me, all of you. With open eyes and the worst possible timing and everything always on fire, I'm staying. We know, Diana said, and the comet smile was there again, and her grip on his hand tightened. We have known since before you did. We were waiting for you to catch up. It is a thing the long-lived learn to be patient about. I called it weeks ago, Karen agreed. On this exact roof. The catch turned out to be the lonely strong people finding each other. Worst catch I ever fell for. Wouldn't trade it. And she did, finally, the thing she had been too blunt and too guarded to do in front of the others until now, which was lean in and rest her head against his shoulder. The wall between Karen's star and the world not just cracked but gone, set down at last on a roof in the evening, beside the people she had stopped bracing against. And Kara Zor-El, who had crossed her own gulf from a world that no longer existed, and had spent 2 years smiling and meaning the smiling and being lonely all the time anyway, looked at the four of them on the parapet with the city glittering below, and did the thing she had done that first dawn over the bay, took his hand without being asked and laced her fingers through his and held on because she was brave about the heart, because she had always been the brave one about the heart, and because the heart. She had told him once and would tell him 1,000 times more across a long, bright, shared life, was not a territory and did not get smaller when it was shared and was, in fact, the one thing in all of 2 universes that you never ran out of. Above them the night came on, and the stars came out, and they were not the stars Harry Potter had been born under. And he found, sitting on a rooftop with 3 women who had refused to let him stand alone, and a city he had learned to love spread out beneath him like something held safe in the palm of a hand, that he did not miss the old stars at all. The light that had remade him had recognized the one thing in him worth calling home across 10,000 worlds, and it had not been the power. It had never been the power. It had been the stubborn, unreasonable will to love and to be loved back against every proof that he should stop, and that will had its home now here under the wrong and beautiful stars, in the middle of the only fire he had ever wanted to stand in. The floor had dropped, it always did, and for the first time in his whole long, lonely, improbable life, Harry Potter had not fallen because the people he loved had decided freely and forever to be the ground. Chapter 7 End.